In May 2023, police in Spain received a troubling call from a peaceful neighborhood in Torremolinos. Inside one of the apartments, they found the body of a young woman who had been stabbed multiple times. The suspect managed to escape but was caught a few hours later at a nearby cafe. However, this tragedy was just the starting point for a string of discoveries that connected to a case that had remained unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of a different apartment, investigators uncovered evidence that stunned even the most seasoned forensic professionals. In 2011, Sabora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Gayo Romeo in a small house in Torremolinos, Spain, close to the beaches. On the surface, their life appeared stable. Sabora worked as a waitress, and Marco was a chef. She frequently called her mother, Elisabetta, to reassure her that everything was fine. However, beneath this facade of stability were serious issues that became more apparent over time. When Elisabetta visited, she could immediately sense the tension in their home. Arguments between Sabora and Marco happened even in front of her. Elisabetta noticed that Sabora often tried to excuse Marco's jealousy and anger, attributing them to temporary difficulties. Yet, Elisabetta believed that their problems were much deeper than everyday challenges. Just 2 years ago, Sabora was a very different person. Sabora was born on September 14, 1991, in Albania. She was known for her vibrant and cheerful nature from an early age. After her parents divorced, her mother, Elisabetta, relocated with her children to Rome, Italy, where they began anew. Sabora quickly became well-liked by her peers, earning the nickname Tibi because of her lively and warm personality. Despite facing financial difficulties, she was determined to help her family. She began working as a waitress at a young age but never lost sight of her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a local beauty contest opened doors to the modeling industry. However, her greatest aspiration was to become a teacher, as she truly loved working with children. Things started to change when Sabora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. At that time, she knew very little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed eager to start anew. However, beneath this appealing exterior was a troubled past. Marco had a reputation for aggressive behavior and issues with substance abuse, which had led to multiple encounters with the police. Despite these red flags, Sabora was drawn to his charisma and chose to ignore the warnings. A year into their relationship, Marco proposed that Sabora move with him to Spain, claiming that there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to convince her against it, expressing doubts about Marco's intentions, but Sabora was determined. She believed this move would be the start of a new chapter where she and Marco could create a happy life together. Initially, Spain seemed like a great opportunity for Sabora and Marco. Sabora quickly secured a job as a waitress, while Marco found work as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sabora shared her hopeful plans with her mother. Unfortunately, their stability didn't last long. Marco started losing job after job, often blaming his employers for his failures. His frustration and jealousy intensified, leading to a rise in his aggressive behavior, which escalated from small disagreements to serious conflicts. When Elisabetta visited Spain to check on Sabora, she was taken aback by the situation. Sabora, once vibrant, confident, now appeared withdrawn and subdued. Marco showed his irritation openly in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments became louder. Despite these significant issues, Sabora continued to defend Marco, reassuring her mother that everything would get better. Those who knew Sabora were confused about why she ignored the warning signs in her relationship. She may have looked to Marco for the support and stability she missed during her childhood. When her family moved from Albania to Italy, they faced many challenges. Elisabetta worked hard to create a better life for her children, but Sabora had to take on adult responsibilities at a young age. Her relationship with Marco seemed like a way to fill the emotional gap, but instead, it added more stress. Life in Spain was becoming increasingly difficult for Sabora as her youthful dreams faded away. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani vanished unexpectedly, leaving her family in despair. The last time she was heard from was through a text message to Marco, her ex-partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was off and her social media accounts were inactive, which was not typical for her. Earlier, Sabora had told her mother she had finally broken up with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt a sense of freedom. She compared it to a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. However, her abrupt silence worried everyone. The situation became even more puzzling when Marco showed up unexpectedly at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to act like a concerned and remorseful man, claiming to care about what had happened. While having coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora might be. Marco explained that they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had left without taking her belongings. However, he later changed his story, saying that a security guard at their apartment complex had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These inconsistent statements raised more suspicions and increased worries. Elisabetta remembered that just a few days before, Sabora had decided to end her relationship with Marco for good after 3 years of attempts to fix things. Despite her efforts to distance herself from him, Marco remained persistently involved in her life. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to Elisabetta, especially considering Sabora's recent breakup and her repeated attempts to cut ties with Marco. Her mother recalled that, before, in 2013, Sabora had even gone back to her mother's home in Italy to leave everything behind, had realized that there was no future for her and Marco. However, Marco refused to let go. He traveled to Italy to see Sabora, begging her to give him another chance and promising to change, even proposing to her. Ultimately, exhausted by their turbulent relationship, Sabora succumbed to his promises. Unfortunately, the same cycle of jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior soon returned, disrupting her peace once again. At one point, Sabora told her mother that if she ever left Marco for good, she might have to disappear completely because she feared he wouldn't let her go. In the following months, Sabora made frequent trips to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports that she may have used a fake Italian ID for these travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter appeared more and more scared, but Sabora rarely provided details about her situation. She only mentioned she was looking for a way to escape her troubles. Her family realized something was seriously wrong. Sabora would never cut off contact with them, especially with her mother and brothers. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that Sabora had chosen to go into hiding to escape Marco's grip. However, the conflicting stories and complete silence from her only raised more concerns. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora's disappearance had not made significant progress, despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Her mother, Elisabetta, was determined to file an official report with the authorities. She strongly believed that Marco, Sabora's ex-partner, was involved, as he was the last person known to have seen her before she disappeared. His behavior during the investigation only deepened suspicions. When questioned, Marco stuck to his story, claiming that Sabora left their home after an argument, after that they lost contact with each other. However, many of her personal items, including clothes and identification, remained in the apartment, which was strange. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her missing to the police. Instead, he claimed he tried to find her himself by printing and distributing flyers in their neighborhood. He also provided conflicting theories about where she might be, suggesting at one point that she had traveled to Argentina or had been seen with an unknown man with whom she allegedly had a confrontation. These statements were inconsistent and lacked credible evidence. Elisabetta, feeling distrustful of Marco, took matters into her own hands to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a specialized organization that helps raise awareness about missing persons cases. As a result, photos of Sabora and requests for information started appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. However, these efforts did not lead to any new information. While Sabora's family continued to search for answers, Marco seemed to be living a fairly normal life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, likely to avoid drawing attention. During this period, he entered into 2 new relationships, both of which ended due to the women complaining about his aggressive behavior. Nevertheless, Marco stayed in Spain, frequently going to the gym and joining a shooting club, which concerned those who knew his background. Cibora's family refused to lose hope. Elisabetta continually urged the police to step up their investigation. As a response, law enforcement began reviewing the case files to identify any overlooked details. They paid close attention to Marco's statements, which had seemed inconsistent from the start. Moreover, there were questions about why he hadn't contacted the police immediately after she went missing. As time went on, public interest in Cibora's case decreased. Despite her family's relentless search for answers, Marco, who was still in Spain, seemed to adapt to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed friendly, focused on fitness and socializing. However, concerns about his character lingered due to his past relationship with Cibora and complaints from his new partners. While Cibora's family held on to hope for updates, the investigation remained stalled. Authorities broadened their search using international missing persons databases, but these efforts produced no leads. For those who knew Cibora well, the uncertainty about her fate was agonizing. By 2023, Marco seemed to have changed his life for the better. He was now living with a new partner, Paula, and they had a child together. Yet, beneath this seemingly fresh start, the same problems that troubled Marco for years persisted. His relationship with Paula was unstable. She confided in close friends and co-workers about experiencing physical abuse from him. During this time, Marco had difficulty maintaining a steady job, which made their financial situation worse. Over time, Paula became more aware of the challenges in Paula and Marco's relationship. She felt that Marco was not only aggressive at work but also unsupportive at home. Despite Paula's efforts to create the appearance of a normal life, her struggles were becoming apparent. For Paula, her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight for her children's custody. Marco's situation was getting worse. He often told his master about his financial problems, stating he was working only for his family's sake. However, his aggressive behavior at work and inability to get along with co-workers made his master wonder if keeping him employed was worth the hassle. Meanwhile, Paula's friend noticed how serious Paula's situation was and encouraged her to stand up against the mistreatment. Despite this, Paula was too afraid to take any confrontational action. She confided in her friend that Marco had hit her 4 times and kicked her, but she minimized the seriousness of these incidents. This indicated that Paula needed immediate help. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula enjoyed her day off, excitedly sharing her plans for a relaxing evening with her coworkers. However, the next day, May 17th, took a tragic turn. Around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting came from the apartment that Paula shared with Marco. Although arguments were common between them, this time it sounded much more severe. Paula's voice was clearly heard, calling for help. Victor, Marco's landlord and boss, could hear a loud disturbance coming from her apartment. Worried, he hurried over with a co-worker from the restaurant. When they arrived at the door, they began knocking and shouting to find out what was going on inside. They heard soft sobbing, which then stopped abruptly. Shortly after, Marco opened the door, appearing calm, and told them everything was fine, saying Paula had just gone to bed. However, the absence of Paula's voice made Victor uneasy. This situation was particularly alarming given recent events. Just days earlier, Victor had fired Marco after a series of troubling incidents, including the mysterious disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had begun to distrust Marco and wanted to prevent any further issues. Now, Marco was involved in another troubling situation. While Victor went to get a spare key to the apartment, the co-worker called the police. Marco, seeming to recognize that the situation was getting serious, remained calm but acted unexpectedly. He suddenly left the apartment and walked out of the building without explanation. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Victor soon returned with a spare key and entered the apartment to investigate further. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body on the floor, stabbed 14 times. Her clothes were drenched in blood, and it was clear she had died several hours prior. The police secured the crime scene and called in forensic experts to gather evidence. They also began searching for Marco, who had fled the scene. Meanwhile, Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Just a few hours later, Marco was found sitting calmly at a cafe table. He did not resist arrest and appeared unfazed by the situation. On May 20, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with a crime involving aggravating circumstances related to gender-based violence. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation and substance testing. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody during the hearing. He chose to stay silent, only speaking to respond to his lawyer's questions. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani. However, just a few days after his arrest, Sabora's case gained attention again. Marco then made a surprising confession while being interrogated at the police station. He stated that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Despite his confession, law enforcement decided to focus on the investigation into Paula's death first and postponed verifying Marco's claims about Sabora. Elisabetta, Sabora's mother, was devastated by the news of Marco's arrest and his admission about her daughter. For 9 years, she had advocated for a reopening of the investigation, convinced of Marco's involvement in Sabora's disappearance. Marco's confession led to the official reopening of Sabora's case, prompting investigators to validate his statements, starting with a look into the apartment where he and Sabora had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators concentrating on Sabora's case meticulously examined the building layout where she and Marco had lived. A notable detail emerged: there was a large space that should have been part of the bedroom according to the building plans, but it was missing in reality. After receiving permission, investigators entered the apartment on June 6 and broke through the wall. They found a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police discovered important evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among these items was a wilted bouquet of flowers on top. The box also contained several plastic bags, one of which had a camping sleeping bag that held human remains. These remains were sent for forensic analysis to identify the person and determine the cause of death. To confirm the identity, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10, police visited the home of Sabora Gagani's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed that the recovered remains belonged to Sabora. In the week that followed, new information about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations in Spain, he claimed to have tried to dispose of the body using acid, but this claim could not be verified. Investigators observed that Marco often changed his statements. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of her daughter's remains was heartbreaking. After 9 years of uncertainty, she felt her hope had been taken away, although she had never stopped seeking answers about what happened to her daughter. Over the years, her life had changed significantly. Sabora's father passed away from illness without ever discovering the truth about his daughter. Although her efforts ultimately led to answers, they also brought a bittersweet feeling of closure. Forensic experts are continuing to analyze the evidence collected from the location where Sabora's remains were discovered. A knife found in a plastic bag has been sent for testing to check for biological traces that might connect it to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators are working with their Italian colleagues to gather additional materials related to Sabora's disappearance. Although there is evidence against him and he initially confessed to being involved in Sabora's death, including disclosing where her remains were located, he later took back his confession. Marco's lawyer claims that his statements were made under pressure and should not be accepted as evidence in court. Nevertheless, investigators argue that the items found in a hidden box, including Sabora's personal belongings, give them solid grounds for pursuing further charges. The investigation into Paula's death is still active, with Marco as the main suspect. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora's remains, her family was finally able to hold a burial after all forensic examinations were completed. Her remains were returned to her loved ones in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, they released balloons into the sky, each carrying heartfelt messages of hope and farewell. Meanwhile, significant attention was on the ongoing legal case against Marco, who was facing charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30, 2024, Marco presented a handwritten 17-page letter admitting his responsibility for Paula's death, but he included many conditions. He stated that the conflict stemmed from ongoing arguments about shared debts and her infidelity. Marco claimed that he used excessive force in self-defense during the altercation, which led to the tragedy. Marco admitted certain things about Paula, but he was unwilling to give detailed information about Sabora's case. He confirmed that he wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, added lime, and sealed it in a wall. However, he insisted that he was not responsible for her death, claiming that his actions were driven by fear of the situation. During the trial, Marco changed his story about how Sabora died, providing a completely different account. He claimed that the Albanian mafia, which he said he was involved with due to debts, was the one who killed her. According to Marco, he had borrowed €25,000 to start a brothel, but the money was stolen. When he couldn't repay the debt, he said 4 men came to his house, and during an argument, one of them killed Sabora. Marco stated that he was then threatened with his own life and forced to dispose of her body to avoid more trouble. This version of events raised serious concerns among investigators because Marco had changed his statements multiple times during the investigation. It became clear that he had lied to mislead authorities. There was no evidence to support his claims of mafia involvement. An autopsy revealed that Sabora had died from multiple stab wounds, indicating a violent crime. Sabora's family finally learned the truth about her fake years after she was reported missing. Her mother, Elisabetta, shared that she had spent the last 9 years hoping for answers. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was in progress, and the court moved forward with a jury trial to address charges of domestic violence and homicide. Meanwhile, Sabora's case had been reopened but had not yet gone to trial, as investigators continued to examine Marco's claims. Further court proceedings were expected. The experiences of Sabora Gagani and Paula illustrate the harmful effects of relationships characterized by manipulation and abuse. Sabora had aspirations for a promising future, while Paula was working to regain control of her life. Both women were negatively impacted by the same individual. Their stories remind us of the crucial need to identify the early signs of abusive behavior and take action to prevent further harm. Katrina Wrights-Brau was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, she saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believed the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m., when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20th, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty Ann, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of two, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved. Oscar Pistorius, a famous Paralympic champion, is originally from South Africa and lives in the city of Pretoria. He was born on November 22, 1986, with a serious developmental disorder that caused his legs to be thin and underdeveloped. Oscar's family went through many hardships, and his parents often argued. He had a younger sister, and after her birth, his parents decided to divorce. However, his father continued to support the family financially. Oscar's mother taught him that one should not give up in difficult situations, but should fight instead. Growing up, Oscar was an active child. When he was just 1 year old, he had to have his legs amputated below the knee because they were not growing. At 17 months old, he was fitted with his first prosthetic legs. As Oscar grew older, he became stronger and decided to pursue a career in sports. He initially played rugby and water polo, but after injuring his kneecap as a teenager, he was advised to take up athletics for rehabilitation. Over time, his passion for athletics developed, particularly for short-distance running. At the age of 15, Oscar lost his mother, who had been his close friend and supporter in all his endeavors. This loss deeply affected him, leading to emotional distress, but he remained determined to continue his training and pursue his goals. His hard work paid off when, at 17, he won a bronze medal in the 100-meter race and a gold medal in the 200-meter race at the Athens Paralympic Games in 2004. In 2007, he showcased his talent again by finishing second in the 400-meter race. Despite his young age, Oscar has achieved incredible success that many can only dream of. He has attracted significant media attention and built a large fan base, earning him the nickname "the man who runs on blades," due to his special prosthetic legs and impressive speed. By 2012, Oscar had reached the peak of his athletic career. During this time, he met Riva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old South African model and law graduate, through a mutual friend named Justin. They felt an instant connection, often described as love at first sight, and began dating. They officially got engaged in 2013. Riva grew up in Cape Town with her father, Barry, her mother, June Steenkamp, and 2 half-brothers. The family later moved to Port Elizabeth, where she pursued a law degree at university. Riva was not only intelligent, graduating with honors, but she was also very attractive. She started modeling at the age of 14, initially as a hobby, but soon began to take it more seriously. By the age of 29, she had become a well-known face in fashion magazines, frequently appearing on television and participating in various shows. However, her life wasn't without challenges. At 20, she was involved in a serious accident while riding. Riva's father, Barry, was a renowned horse trainer and breaker. He introduced his daughter to riding at a young age, starting her off with a pony. When Riva was 20, she suffered a serious lower back injury after falling from a horse, which required her to nearly relearn how to walk. By 2012, she had fully recovered and had achieved both wealth and fame, similar to Oscar. Their first meeting was unplanned, but they encountered each other again at a major award event where Oscar was being honored. Photographers captured them together, and the media quickly labeled them a stunning couple, taking numerous photos and asking questions. Both Riva and Oscar were talented in their respective fields and appeared to be a perfect match. Eventually, they developed feelings for each other, began dating, and got engaged. On Valentine's Day, February 14, 2013, Oscar and Riva celebrated 3 months of their relationship with a dinner at Oscar's home. Oscar lived in a mansion located within a gated community, where all the houses were similar to his and were surrounded by tall fences for security. The residents were very wealthy and took extensive measures to protect themselves, such as using CCTV cameras, combination locks, and other security systems. The cameras at the entrance captured the arrival of Oscar and Riva. They enjoyed a romantic candlelight dinner and stayed up late into the night. Later, someone told the police that they had heard the sound of weapons exploding in Oscar's villa. Emergency services quickly arrived at the scene where a crowd had gathered to understand what had happened. Paramedics entered the house and found a girl lying on the bathroom floor, covered in blood. After examining her, they realized she was beyond help, she was dead. Oscar was found in the house, in a state of shock. The police tried to calm him, but he was so distressed that he couldn't comprehend what they were saying. He cried and screamed, eventually managing to explain that he had killed her because he thought she was a burglar. According to Oscar, after dinner, he and Riva went to bed. Early the next morning, he went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, predicting that it would be a hot day. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from the bathroom. Although he knew Riva was in bed with him, he didn't check on her. Believing that someone had broken into the house, he took a weapon from the nightstand where he always kept it. In his youth, he had been attacked by an unstable person and had received threats from envious individuals, which is why he took security seriously and kept weapons at home. That morning, however, he hadn't put on his prostheses and felt defenseless. When he heard a noise behind the bathroom door, he attacked it, trying to act quickly. Unfortunately, there was no burglar, only Riva, who had woken up and gone to the bathroom. Upon realizing her tragic mistake, she screamed for help, but it was too late. An investigation showed that Riva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. An investigation showed that Riva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. Early in the morning, Riva's family received a phone call that filled June, her mother, with dread. She hesitated to answer, knowing that calls at such an early hour often bring bad news. Inspector Bada delivered the heartbreaking information, causing her world to crumble. She struggled to stay upright as her legs gave way. Riva's father experienced several heart attacks after learning of her death. The next time they would see their daughter would be at the crematorium to say their goodbyes. Riva's mother, June, quickly informed the police of her concerns about Oscar, noting that her daughter and Oscar had ongoing issues. Although they were still in a relationship which had lasted only 3 months, it was clear that things were coming to an end. Riva's friend supported this perspective, revealing that Riva had expressed her desire to clarify their relationship on Valentine's Day and to break up amicably while remaining friends. Both the mother and friend shared similar views on the situation. In contrast, Oscar's friends expressed a different opinion, claiming that he was very happy in his relationship with Riva. The murder of Riva, a well-known model, by Oscar, a prominent Paralympic athlete, attracted significant media attention, leading to varying public opinions about the incident. Some people believed Oscar's explanation that the attack was accidental, while others suspected he may have had intentions to harm Riva. the authorities had not reached a consensus on Oscar's version of the incident. Many aspects of Oscar's story seem to align with the details of his relationship with Riva. Friends of both Oscar and Riva stated that they were deeply in love, with Riva's friends confirming her happiness in this new relationship. She had previously experienced toxic relationships and felt fortunate to have found a good partner. Surveillance footage from a supermarket 2 days before the incident showed Oscar and Riva happily hugging and kissing while they shopped, appearing to be a couple in good spirits. This footage was presented as evidence during the investigation. However, a confusing detail emerged. Riva's friend claimed that she planned to visit Oscar's house on Valentine's Day to end their relationship, which raises questions. Why would she choose such a romantic day for a breakup? Additionally, during a police search of Oscar's home, they discovered a gift that Riva had prepared for him, a beautifully decorated frame with a collage of their happy moments together, accompanied by a heartfelt note expressing her love. This made it hard to believe that she intended to break up with him before giving such a romantic gift. The trial received significant media coverage, revealing an important detail. Oscar was deeply concerned about his safety and feared that someone might break into his house at night. This fear had troubled him since childhood, possibly inherited from his mother. After Oscar's parents separated, his mother and the children continued to live in a cottage where a thief had once broken in. Oscar, who has used prosthetic legs since birth, would take them off at home, leaving him vulnerable and unable to escape in an emergency. This fear was corroborated by Oscar's psychologist and his brother's friends. The weapon he had that morning was unlicensed and intended for self-defense. Riva's mother, June, informed the police that Riva's relationship with Oscar had recently taken a turn for the worse. A friend of Riva confirmed this, and several neighbors provided further insight. One woman testified that she heard Riva scream the night of the murder, describing it as a scream filled with fear, indicating that Riva was terrified for her life. Another neighbor, called as a witness by the defense, claimed he heard screams too, but he was convinced they were from a man, not a woman. Furthermore, during the trial, it was revealed that Riva was found on the bathroom floor, with the door locked and her mobile phone in hand. While it was normal for her to get up at night to use the bathroom, the locked door raises questions, particularly because she brought her phone with her. The prosecution investigated Oscar's history and discovered that years ago, he was involved in a serious boating accident on a river. He crashed into an obstacle and required immediate medical attention. Doctors performed surgery to repair his broken jaw and ribs, providing over 100 stitches. He was also diagnosed with a concussion and remained in a coma for several days. When police arrived at the scene, they found numerous empty beer bottles at the bottom of the boat. Eyewitnesses reported that Oscar was driving recklessly, screaming and laughing, while the boat sped down the river. After the accident, Oscar insisted he hadn't been drinking, but police tests revealed he was under the influence of alcohol. Additionally, it was revealed that Oscar had a long-standing problem with alcohol addiction. On March 3, 2014, the trial for the murder of Riva began. On September 12, Oscar Pistorius was found guilty of manslaughter because the judge determined that he did not intend to kill his girlfriend. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. This sentence was considered lenient, and with good behavior, Oscar could have been released early. Over the years, Oscar gained many enemies and became concerned for his safety. The most notable adversary was prosecutor Jerry Nell, nicknamed Bull Terrier. After reviewing the case, he remarked, "Oscar is talking nonsense," and began searching for inconsistencies in Oscar's story. Jerry Nell, a dedicated professional, recognized that he was dealing with a man who had taken another person's life and sought true justice. After several court appeals, Jerry Nell succeeded in having Oscar's lenient sentence overturned. 2 years later, Oscar was back in court, facing charges of premeditated murder. Before the hearing began, the prosecutor wanted to speak with Oscar privately while he was under house arrest. He reminded Oscar that his home was protected by a 3-meter fence topped with electrified wire, along with an expensive security system and numerous motion sensors. Given this, where did the idea of a robber come from? The autopsy results showed that Riva had food in her stomach that she had eaten at 1 a.m., suggesting that she and Oscar had not gone to bed that night. The prosecutor suspected that Oscar was feeling jealousy toward Riva. As she prepared to leave, he became enraged. When Riva locked herself in the bathroom out of fear, he began attacking. This raised several questions. Why did Oscar start attacking? Why didn't he call the police if he believed a robber was in the bathroom? And why did he continue to attack after the first shot, especially when he heard Riva's screams? Overwhelmed by the prosecutor's portrayal of that night, Oscar struggled to respond. Jerry Nell assured Oscar that they would address many unanswered questions in court. The trial eventually took place, resulting in the judge sentencing Oscar Pistorius to 6 years in prison, a sentence that was similar to the original one. Oscar's lawyers later filed an appeal, which led to an increase in his sentence to 13 years and 6 months. As of 2023, Oscar can apply for parole, but he is still serving time in prison. Despite his repeated requests to be transferred to a different facility due to his fear of potential violence from other inmates, these requests were never granted. This marked the end of Oscar Pistorius' sporting career and public admiration. He was once a national hero, but his actions not only took the lives of others but also ruined his own promising future. Lorraine Cox was a 32-year-old woman living in Exeter, UK. She is dating a man named Ellie who lives in Scotland. Although the distance between them is quite long, they have gotten used to it. At first, they only met on weekends and talked, but gradually their feelings for each other grew deeper. By 2020, they had been in contact in this way for 2 years. Despite the challenges of the distance, they decided to get engaged. Now, they are building a future together and preparing for their wedding. Lorraine is also planning to have their first child. However, in early 2020, their plans had to change for several reasons. By February, Lorraine had moved to Scotland to be with Ellie, where she obtained a temporary visa, and they spent considerable time together. When summer arrived, she wanted to return to Exeter to visit her family and friends for a month or two. This trip was not a breakup, she simply missed her loved ones. Afterward, she intended to return to Scotland and continue strengthening their relationship. Although restrictions in the UK remained strict, they were gradually relaxing, allowing public events to resume and many establishments to reopen. People eagerly took to the streets to socialize again, and Lorraine was no exception. On September 1, 2020, she arrived at her father's house in Exeter, excited to reconnect with friends. They spent the evening visiting several bars, enjoying drinks and good company, until they realized it was time to go home. Everyone left in a good mood. On September 2nd, Lorraine posted an unusual message on social media, claiming she was going to leave the country. This surprised everyone, as her only previous move had been to Scotland, and she had no plans to relocate again. She had just arrived to visit her father and intended to stay for at least a month. This sudden change in her mood and plans seemed out of character. In her post, Lorraine mentioned wanting to move about 50 kilometers from her father's house to a place called Plymouth, which she described as the first stop on her planned journey. This behavior was shocking because Lorraine was not known for making impulsive decisions, especially on such a significant scale. She had a stable life and a loving relationship in Scotland and had never mentioned wanting to move elsewhere. Now, she was considering a move toward France. Unsurprisingly, this post had a deep impact on Ellie. They had a strong relationship, making his fear of losing her understandable. Lorraine's friends bombarded her with questions. Initially, she responded willingly, but as the conversation progressed, her tone changed and mistrust grew. Those who knew her well noticed shifts in her writing style. She began using unfamiliar emojis, making odd mistakes, and her messages conveyed a sense of hostility. This worried her loved ones, as she had always maintained positive relationships with them, and there was no reason for her to display such aggression or undergo drastic life changes. Her father, Tony, who was hosting her during this time, even showed a family friend her old messages alongside the new ones. He pointed out clear inconsistencies in her writing style. Even those who didn't know her well noticed something was off. Throughout this time, Lorraine's boyfriend, who was named Ellie, was especially concerned and tried to understand her behavior. Initially, she responded to him with short, cold replies, but eventually, her answers became even more abrupt. The conversation ended when Lorraine sent him an emoji of a middle finger. This intensified the suspicion that someone else was using her account. Ellie had known Lorraine for 2 years, so the idea that the trip was related to a breakup or conflict seemed unlikely. They valued each other, which made her odd responses even more perplexing. Unfortunately, because of the distance, her boyfriend felt helpless and unable to intervene. A situation arose concerning Tony, Lorraine's father. Determined to discover the truth, he faced a challenge because he was away at the time and couldn't check his daughter's room for clues. Instead, he began speaking to Lorraine's friends, particularly those who had been with her the day before her sudden move to Plymouth. He was scheduled to return home the next day. Upon arriving home, Tony's first action was to go to Lorraine's room, where his suspicions grew stronger. He had already spoken with her close friends, and they all confirmed that no one had seen Lorraine since their breakup at the bar when everyone had left for the night. Inside Lorraine's room, it appeared as though she had never returned after her outing with friends. Her belongings from Scotland remained untouched, and nothing was missing from her room. It looked as if she had left for an extended trip without taking any of her things, which seemed impossible. The most alarming discovery was the bag she had left behind. Lorraine had diabetes and always carried a first aid kit to monitor her blood sugar levels. Her health depended on these supplies, and she never went anywhere, even for a quick trip to the store, without them. For outings like the one to the bar, she typically used a smaller bag. The fact that her larger kit was still in her room raised serious concerns about her recent plans. Tony realized that his daughter had not returned from the party, leading him to fear that something might have happened to her health. The messages she had exchanged with friends and relatives also seemed troubling. Worried, Tony sent another message to Lorraine on social media, expressing concern for her health and asking if she was okay. He warned her that if she did not respond, he would have to contact the police. The message was seen, but he received no reply. After that, Tony's and Lorraine's friends could no longer tolerate the uncertainty and began their search. They started by looking for clues in the bar where they had spent the evening on September 2nd. They interviewed witnesses, distributed flyers, and retraced the presumed route Lorraine would have taken home. It was clear that something alarming must have happened during her journey since she never came home again. Law enforcement and journalists quickly became involved. They were skeptical of the theory that Lorraine might have suffered a health crisis. Detectives believed that if that were the case, she would not have been able to send messages to her friends. Furthermore, several days had passed since her disappearance, and she would likely have been found in a hospital, but tests of recent admissions yielded no results. It appeared far more likely that Lorraine had encountered danger from someone. Journalists rushed to report on the situation, highlighting concerns over Lorraine's disappearance. They recalled that in May 2018, 2 years before Lorraine vanished, an attacker named Robert Proud had attacked a woman who strikingly resembled her. He had abused her but did not kill her, and then evaded capture for a long time. Given his criminal history, it raised fears that there could be more victims. Although he had completed his prison sentence, investigators began considering Lorraine as a potential victim. At the time of her disappearance, Robert was living near the path Lorraine would have taken home. This connection led to his arrest, and police sought to extract a confession from him. They believed he had kidnapped, abused, and possibly killed her, and that he might have disposed of her body. It was suspected that he took her phone and pretended to communicate with her friends and family to buy himself time and create confusion. There was another theory regarding Lorraine's disappearance. Some believed that Robert might have attacked her, but instead of dying, she was hiding to avoid becoming his victim again. The detectives prioritized finding Lorraine because she was clearly in danger. Robert might have been holding her hostage. The situation could have escalated, posing a significant threat. To test this theory, they began reviewing surveillance footage from cameras along Lorraine's potential route that night. Even after narrowing down the time frame, they had about 11,000 hours of footage from over 400 cameras across 120 different locations. Analyzing this footage was time-consuming, but it proved worthwhile, yielding the first clues needed to catch the criminal. Eventually, they spotted a girl who matched Lorraine's description in the recordings. After leaving her friends at the bar, She headed toward her father's house without making any turns. She almost made it home, but a few blocks away, something caught her attention: a kebab shop on the ground floor of an apartment building, which was open at night. Lorraine went inside, likely to grab a snack, and then left to eat on a bench before continuing her way home. Around 2:45 a.m., she returned to the kebab shop, but this time accompanied by an unfamiliar man. This raised alarms because he didn't appear to be just a random passerby. The footage suggested they had interacted, and he had managed to get her attention. The police continued to investigate the recordings and noted that the young man had been following Lorraine after they left the shop. This behavior was concerning, especially since she seemed to be walking voluntarily and the street was deserted. Detectives suspected the man might be a predator who targeted his victim, potentially involved in Lorraine's disappearance and the messages she had sent to her loved ones after the incident. He maintained a distance while following her, trying to remain inconspicuous, and seemed to be assessing the situation. It looked as though he was stalking her, especially since she appeared intoxicated and was stumbling. She had a valuable phone, and with no one accompanying her that night, he saw an opportunity to attack. The police attempted to locate another recording to determine how Lorraine left the building from at least one camera, but were unsuccessful. It appeared she had not exited at all. They spent considerable time reviewing the video footage, only to confirm that Lorraine had not left since she was last seen. The detectives concluded that she might still be inside, possibly being held against her will. Unfortunately, by the time they gathered this information, 8 days had passed. Given this long duration, only a miracle could save Lorraine, who suffered from diabetes. Nevertheless, her family held on to hope. The police obtained a clear photo of the man who accompanied and followed Lorraine that night. They printed it out and began distributing it through the media to attract witnesses. Initially, they visited the kebab shop and spoke with the owner. He informed them that he lived above the shop but had rented the apartment below to a young man about a month ago. This young man had moved in unofficially and was very withdrawn, to the extent that the owner didn't know much about him. The owner even expressed doubts about the young man's name. When police officers visited the apartment, they anticipated finding a crime scene. However, everything was surprisingly neat and clean. The young man living there identified himself as Christopher Mayer and showed them his identification. There was no sign of Lorraine in the apartment, and he allowed the detectives inside without any resistance. They inspected the place thoroughly to ensure that no one was being held against their will. Christopher was then shown a photo of Lorraine, along with a CCTV image in which a man resembling him was seen accompanying her to the house. He strongly denied any connection, claiming that he did not know her. However, the clear photograph made the police skeptical, as the similarities were unmistakable. A brief verbal confrontation ensued, with Christopher maintaining his stance. During this exchange, he insisted that he would never bring a strange woman to his apartment. The police then became interested in Christopher's mobile phone, which they seized for examination. They discovered that it contained Lorraine's SIM card, although the card was currently missing. This evidence confirmed that he had at least seen her recently. Further investigation revealed that a suspicious post had been made on Lorraine's social media account using this mobile phone. It appeared that Christopher had sent strange messages to her loved ones. After the unsettling incident, whatever it was, he had taken Lorraine's phone. Rather than using it for communication, he inserted a SIM card into his own phone to access her contact list and social media account. This raised further suspicions about Christopher. He was the last person confirmed to have seen Lorraine alive, and his attempts to manipulate her account seemed suspicious. It became clear that he was trying to cover his tracks, raising questions about his motives that the authorities still needed to uncover. Christopher was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Lorraine Cox. That same day, forensic experts arrived at his apartment to investigate. They used a substance called luminol to carefully examine the area. While they found several suspicious traces of evidence, the most alarming findings were in a nearby alley. During their search of the apartment, they discovered blood and numerous signs that supported the theory that Lorraine was dead, particularly around a garbage can. The forensic team speculated that Christopher might have disposed of evidence by throwing away the body. They searched the alley and found a large plastic bag inside one of the trash containers that contained human remains. However, it was not a complete body. Some parts, including the torso and head, were missing, making identification difficult. Consequently, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation, and the work continued. Detectives learned that on the night of Lorraine's disappearance, in addition to Christopher, 5 other young men were present. However, none appeared on the CCTV footage with Lorraine. These men likely entered the apartment to buy food or for other reasons, but their involvement needed further investigation. They could have unwittingly been present during the crime or could have assisted in covering up evidence. Notably, the group behaved very differently. Except for Christopher, everyone was cooperative and willing to provide information. Upon further investigation, the 5 other young men were found to be locals who lived nearby. Since there was no evidence against them, they were released. In stark contrast, Christopher was uncooperative, reluctant to talk, and often gave vague or confusing answers. He seemed to believe that the police lacked sufficient evidence against him, but they soon discovered that his real name was Azam Mangori. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation, as detectives confronted him with the truth, signaling the beginning of the unraveling of his story. Azam claims that he changed his name because he was born in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where people who do not follow tradition can face severe punishment, including being stoned to death. As an adult, he left his conservative homeland but still lives in fear of being hunted down and killed. To avoid this dangerous situation, he began calling himself Christopher. He had been living illegally in the UK since December 2018 to avoid returning to Iraq. Azam also possessed a high-quality fake ID under the name Christopher Mayer to evade detection by immigration authorities. This explains why the landlord knew almost nothing about the man. He was very cautious, had not attended school or worked anywhere, and lived off odd jobs. However, the interrogation ended abruptly. After admitting to these things, he refused to talk about Lorraine. His previous admissions were not significant to the police. DNA testing confirmed that the remains found in a trash bin were those of Lorraine. In Azam's apartment, DNA traces and other evidence indicated that Lorraine had been killed there because Azam had failed to clean thoroughly. The police also discovered a large handsaw and replacement blades purchased after the crime. Other items found included a driver's license, a debit card, and a wallet, all mutilated. Nearby trash bins contained bloody clothing, Lorraine's phone, and a SIM card discarded in the sewer. Unfortunately, parts of her body were never recovered. Detectives analyzed the location data from Azam's mobile phone on the day of Lorraine's murder and the subsequent days when he disposed of evidence. This investigation led them to a location on the city's outskirts known as Tin Pit Hill. During the search, they found Lorraine's torso and head, which were not well concealed. Investigators noted unsettling details. A piece of clothing was stuffed into her mouth, and a patch of skin was missing from her back, possibly taken as a trophy by the perpetrator. Unfortunately, no other body parts were located, and the remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, complicating the determination of the cause of death. The forensic expert concluded that Lorraine had likely been strangled. Despite strong evidence of his guilt, Azam continued to deny his involvement and created false stories. He even attempted to involve banned organizations in the case. The trial commenced in spring 2021. Although he never confessed, Azam and his defense team significantly altered his narrative. He now claimed to have a normal orientation and stated that he encountered Lorraine when she came to his place late at night after a bar visit. He approached her on the street and convinced her to come to his apartment for some intimacy. Azam maintained that Lorraine voluntarily came to his apartment after drinking heavily and using illegal substances. He claimed that after trying those substances himself, he experienced severe distortion of perception and lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he found Lorraine in the bathroom, unresponsive. He alleged that he saw a puddle of urine beneath her and believed she had overdosed. Azam attempted to perform CPR, but it was unsuccessful. In a panic and without knowing the emergency number, he sat on the bathroom floor next to her body. Hallucinations then began, and he claimed to see dark creatures emerging from her mouth, prompting him to shove a piece of his t-shirt into her mouth to stop it. He pushed the cloth in so far that it could have caused her to choke. Despite being in a state of panic, he managed to find and send a video he had recorded around the same time to a friend, where he appeared calm and even exhaled smoke into the camera. He explained that he filmed the video to help himself calm down. His behavior grew increasingly bizarre. Instead of calling for help, he decided to dispose of the body and planned to flee from his relatives. Naturally, this account sounded implausible, leaving him with no solid defense. According to Azam, he was unsure what he would do after Lorraine died and kept her body in his apartment until he decided to dispose of it. When his anxiety reached its peak, he chose to throw it away. He called a taxi to take the bag with the remains to a wooded area on the outskirts of Exeter. Prosecutors noted that he seemed to be obsessed with amputation, as evidenced by the precise cuts he made, which horrified forensic experts. It was clear he had researched this topic extensively and was well prepared. That evening, Azam tried to connect with people on an escort website, seeking companionship but was unsuccessful. Later, he saw Lorraine on the street eating alone and viewed her as an ideal target. It seems that Azam may have premeditated this murder to fulfill his dark fantasies. Even with substantial evidence against him, his trial lasted 5 weeks. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of murder and attempting to obstruct justice. He received a life sentence but is eligible for parole after 20 years, which means he could be released at the age of 44. Lorraine's boyfriend, Ellie, experienced profound grief, stating that a part of him died with her. He lives daily with this pain and struggles against despair. Lorraine's father, Tony, organized a charity march to rally support for his daughter. Participants silently walked the route she would have taken from the bar to her home, a journey she never completed. In the aftermath, Tony became an activist advocating for more CCTV cameras on UK streets to help prevent and solve violent crimes. He also started to make regular donations to an anti-abuse organization based in the UK. Even after justice was served, Lorraine Cox's family remained uncertain about how Azam was able to lure her into his apartment. Security footage showed her following him willingly. Azam claimed that he engaged her in conversation and offered her alcohol and a banned substance, which she accepted. However, toxicology reports found no traces of banned substances in her system, and a forensic expert stated that she did not die from diabetes, suggesting that Azam's account might be false. Sadly, the truth about what happened in his apartment may never be revealed, as only Azam and Lorraine know what truly occurred. Some believe Azam exploited Lorraine's kindness by asking for help, and that she may have felt unable to refuse, ultimately leading her into a dangerous situation. Tiffany James was born on August 18, 1980, in Tampa, Florida. She was the only child of Rosalind James and Turner Humphrey. Her parents were never married and separated soon after her birth. Her father moved away, started a new family, and showed little interest in her. Years later, as an adult, Tiffany decided to locate her father. They spoke, and she assured him that she held no grudges and wanted to keep in touch. This reunion allowed Tiffany to meet her half-siblings and their families, leading to the development of strong, positive relationships. Meanwhile, Rosalind focused on her own life and left Tiffany with her grandparents. Although Tiffany had both biological parents, she was primarily raised by her grandparents. Her mother Rosalind visited occasionally but did not play an active role in her upbringing. It was her aunts, Barbara and Vicky, along with her grandmother Beulah, who took on the parenting responsibilities. They ensured Tiffany attended preschool and school, celebrated her achievements, and supported her in every way. She was an outstanding student with a passion for literature and a creative spirit. She dreamed of opening her own beauty salon and becoming the best in her city. Tiffany was a sociable, popular, and stylish person. She often attracted attention with her looks and confidence, making her appealing to young men. While in high school, she started dating a boy named Derek Andrews, who was a year older. They both believed their love would last forever. In her senior year, Tiffany became pregnant and gave birth to their first child, a son named Derek, on July 26, 1998. This changed her plans for college, as she dedicated herself to motherhood. Derek took on various odd jobs to support his family, while Tiffany's family helped them as much as they could. In August 2002, 4-year-old Derek became a big brother when his parents welcomed another son, Darian, named after his paternal grandfather. At this point, Tiffany and Derek were living together in a small rented apartment. Although money was tight, they remained hopeful for their future and dreamed of creating a stable life together. A couple of years later, however, their romantic feelings faded, and they decided to separate amicably. The son stayed with Tiffany while Derek supported them and made an effort to spend time with his children. He eventually began a new relationship but remained committed to being an involved father to Darian and Derek. As a single mother with 2 young sons, Tiffany started to seriously consider her future. She wanted a career that would allow her to provide for her family independently. Since she had not pursued further education after high school, she was eager to change that. Tiffany enrolled in a medical college, aiming to become a cosmetic specialist. Her ultimate goal was to open her own practice or even a clinic where she could turn her passion into a successful business. To manage her finances better, she moved back in with her grandparents, as paying for both tuition and rent was too much of a burden. Her family helped care for her sons whenever she was at work or in class. After finishing her education, she got a job at a private clinic as an assistant to a well-known doctor. She had a steady income and began advancing in her career. For a while, it appeared that everything was finally coming together for her. However, she found herself lacking a strong, supportive partner to lean on during difficult times. In early 2007, Tiffany met a man named Daryl Williams. He was 14 years older than she was and had 3 grown children from a previous marriage. Despite their age difference, this did not hinder their romantic relationship. She believed that he was a mature and trustworthy man, genuinely prepared for a serious commitment. Their relationship developed quickly, and soon, Tiffany, at 27, found herself pregnant. This news shocked both of them, but they were excited, and Daryl proposed to Tiffany, who happily accepted. However, during the routine checkup, she learned she was expecting twins. In March 2008, she welcomed twin girls, whom she named Diamond and Denia. This happy event has brought joy to her life, and she has devoted all her love to her family, cherishing every moment spent together. Tiffany enjoyed taking her children to different events, discovering new activities, and creating lasting memories. She also loved dressing her daughters in matching outfits that gave them a fashionable appearance. Her older sons participated in sports like baseball, track, and swimming, while her twins, Diamond and Denia, began dance classes and rhythmic gymnastics at an early age. As the years went by, the children grew, but Tiffany and Daryl never married. Gradually, their relationship began to deteriorate as they found it increasingly difficult to communicate. Tiffany eventually realized that Daryl was not the person she had thought he was. Their relationship ended when she discovered his infidelity. Without any hesitation, she gathered her children and departed. After separating from Daryl, Tiffany relocated with her family to the quiet town of Brandon, Florida. This community was known for its strong infrastructure, low crime rates, and affordable housing, making it an ideal place to raise a family and start over. Eager to create a stable future, Tiffany completed a hairstyling program and landed a job at one of the top salons in town. She quickly built a loyal clientele and gained a reputation for her talent and creativity. Aspiring to open her own salon one day, she began looking for potential rental locations. Her skills, ambition, and rising reputation established her as one of the most in-demand stylists in the area, paving the way for a bright career ahead. As a single mother of 4, she moved into a spacious rental apartment in a newly built residential complex situated in one of the town's finest neighborhoods. Nearby amenities included a school, a dance studio, and a large sports center, everything she needed for a comfortable and fulfilling life for her family. By 2012, her sons had become more independent and often helped care for their younger sisters. Around this time, Tiffany decided to reconnect with her father and half-siblings. She traveled to Alabama to find them, and their family bonds were restored. They began to stay in touch, visit each other for holidays, and their children quickly grew close. Life was falling into place. Her finances were stable, and she was surrounded by loved ones. Although she felt secure about her future, Tiffany, a young, ambitious, and attractive woman, yearned for romance. She still believed in love and hoped to find a man who would love her and embrace her family, a man with whom she could build a strong and happy home. In 2014, Tiffany started her own small business, which began to thrive. That same year, at 34 years old, she reconnected with Ben, a man she had known in her youth but hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Their unexpected encounter at a shopping mall marked the start of something special. Initially, they kept their relationship private. Ben was also a single parent who had recently settled in Brandon with his 2 young children. They began as friends, sharing coffee and meaningful conversations. When Ben finally confessed his feelings for Tiffany, she felt like the happiest woman in the world and admitted she felt the same way. Their relationship grew deeper and both families supported it. Tiffany was ecstatic, savoring this newfound happiness without rushing. She kept their romance discreet, sharing details only with her closest friends and family and refraining from posting pictures of them together on social media. Gradually, she prepared for a significant change as they decided to move in together and create a home as one family. On October 1, 2015, Tiffany posted a romantic and mysterious message on her personal social media account. The post featured a photo of 2 hands clasped together, one male and one female, both adorned with wedding bands, set against the backdrop of a Bible. The caption simply read, "Yes." This suggested that she was engaged, but she chose to keep her fiancé's identity a secret for the time being. Tiffany and her family always put a lot of effort into celebrating Halloween. They planned their costumes ahead of time, carved pumpkins into glowing lanterns, and went out to collect candy from their neighbors. By this time, Darian and Derek were old enough to enjoy the holiday with their friends, while the younger twins, Diamond and Denia, still loved going trick-or-treating with their mom. Since they lived in a large apartment complex, going door-to-door wasn't this thrilling. Instead, they visited a nearby neighborhood filled with single-family homes, where Halloween decorations created a festive atmosphere. Families in costumes moved from house to house, and generous homeowners made sure to have plenty of candy, so no one went home empty-handed. That night was supposed to be fun and relaxing, but no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. A local woman was home alone, preparing to watch a horror movie to get into the Halloween spirit. The streets outside were quiet, most families had already gone home, and she didn't expect any more trick-or-treaters. Around 9 p.m., she was dozing on the couch with the TV still on when suddenly there was a loud noise, like an explosion, that woke her up. At that moment, her front door, which she had forgotten to lock, swung open. Startled, she quickly got up to shut it. What she saw on her doorstep left her frozen. A figure dressed entirely in black, wearing a hockey mask like the ones from the Friday the 13th movies, stood there. Instead of a machete, the person was holding a shotgun. For a split second, it felt like a scene from a movie or an elaborate Halloween joke. In shock and unsure of her next move, she glanced down and saw a woman lying at the figure's feet, writhing in pain and struggling to move. The masked figure looked down at her for a moment before raising the weapon again. Terrified, the woman ran for her life. She slammed the door just as 2 more deafening gunshots rang out. Collapsing onto the floor, she covered her head with her hands, fearing she might be next. Then, silence. The stillness was broken by a faint tapping on the window. At first, she ignored it, too frightened to move. But when the tapping came again, she cautiously approached the window and, against her better judgment, looked outside. There stood a young girl, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking of her own safety, the woman rushed to the door to help. Outside, she noticed another young girl sitting on the ground, shocked, hugging her knees. Without hesitation, she brought both girls inside, locked the door, and grabbed her phone to call for emergency services. By that time, other neighbors had heard the chaos and called the authorities. When first responders arrived, they discovered a woman lying in a pool of blood on the pavement. Despite her critical injuries, she was still alive. Paramedics did everything they could, but unfortunately, on the way to the hospital, she died from her wounds. The victim had no identification, and the two young girls were too traumatized to speak. However, as more neighbors gathered, they quickly recognized the woman, Tiffany, who is the owner of a local hair salon, along with her twin daughters, Diamond and Denaya. Authorities immediately contacted Tiffany's relatives, while Diamond and Denaya were taken to the hospital for evaluation. Fortunately, neither child had suffered any physical injuries, but they were deeply traumatized. Mental health professionals were brought in to help them process the event. Many people had been out celebrating that night, and several witnesses recalled the horrifying scene. However, piecing together the full story was challenging, as many struggled to believe what they had seen. It all felt too surreal, almost like a staged performance. Meanwhile, the masked attacker slipped into the crowd of costumed revelers and disappeared without a trace. Neighbors reported seeing a silver Chevrolet sedan parked near the house shortly before the incident. Witnesses noted that the car sped off after the first loud noise but stopped a short distance away moments later. It was uncertain whether the driver fled in a panic or had a connection to the attack. Unfortunately, no one saw the license plate, and no one could identify the driver's gender. Adding to the difficulty, there were no security cameras in the area to capture the incident. Witnesses could not provide even a basic description of the suspect, who was fully covered in a costume, hood, hockey mask, and gloves. They only agreed that the attacker was slightly taller than average and had a muscular build. At the crime scene, Tiffany's handbag was found on the ground, with its strap torn and its contents strewn about. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, but this theory was quickly dismissed. The cash inside the purse was untouched, and Tiffany was still wearing several pieces of gold jewelry. Nothing had been stolen. Moreover, it seemed unlikely that such a violent act would occur over a simple mugging, especially with a shotgun involved. The aggression of the attack suggested that it was personal. But who would want to harm Tiffany, a cherished mother and respected community member? Investigators began by questioning her ex-partners and her current boyfriend. Tiffany had been separated from her former partners, Derek Andrews and Daryl Williams, for years, and any previous conflicts had long since dissipated. Her current partner, Ben, remained a mystery since Tiffany had kept their relationship private, revealing little to friends and family. Due to this secrecy, detectives felt it necessary to question him urgently. Officers arrived at Ben's house around 5 a.m. the next morning. Despite the early hour, all the lights in the house were on, and Ben was found sitting by the front door with a shotgun. The officers ordered him to drop the weapon and raise his hands, which he complied with, insisting he was not involved in the attack. He then pleaded with the officers to protect his children, explaining that he had learned about the crime just hours earlier and was fearful that the attacker might come after him next. He felt a strong need to protect his family. During the questioning, Ben shared that in the months prior to the incident, Tiffany had told him about someone she believed was stalking her. She suspected it might be her ex-fiancé, Daryl, who was also the father of her twin daughters, Diamond and Denaya. Their separation had been difficult, and they were currently engaged in a custody battle over the girls. Ben confirmed his whereabouts on Halloween night with a strong alibi. He stated that he, Tiffany, and their children had gone trick-or-treating earlier that evening. Later, he took his children to visit relatives while Tiffany and the twins intended to return to their home briefly before staying the night at his place. However, she never showed up. Almost at midnight, Tiffany's oldest son called to deliver the devastating news. Once investigators verified Ben's alibi, they released him and allowed him to go home. The focus then shifted to Daryl. Was he involved in such a violent act? Detectives were skeptical. Could he really have committed something so horrific in front of his own daughters, leaving them with lifelong trauma? On November 1st, officers visited Daryl's last known address but found that he no longer lived there. Instead, they encountered his adult daughter, who informed them that her father had moved in with his new girlfriend 6 months ago. She was visibly shaken when she heard about Tiffany's tragic death and was clearly in shock. His daughter disclosed concerning information about his short temper and controlling behavior. He was known to be domineering and would become furious when things didn't go his way. Additionally, he had a strong interest in firearms and owned a shotgun. Daryl's daughter explained that her father's breakup with Tiffany had been very contentious. He harbored deep resentment over having to pay child support and had fought hard for full custody of their twins, even though he knew he had little chance of winning. However, she noted that if Tiffany were gone, he would have had a better chance of gaining custody of the girls. Her daughter described her father as ruthless and believed he was capable of committing a crime. After speaking with her, investigators went to Daryl's workplace, a large chemical plant. His supervisor spoke highly of him, describing him as a dedicated worker who could handle the workload of 2 people and was always willing to take on extra shifts. However, Daryl's aggressive demeanor often led to conflicts with co-workers, sometimes resulting in physical confrontations. Notably, on the night of November 1st, Daryl, for the first time, refused a last-minute shift change, citing personal reasons. This unusual behavior raised further suspicions, as it left him without a confirmed alibi for the night of the crime. Detectives visited the home of Daryl's new girlfriend, Rosalind. They noticed a silver Chevrolet sedan in the driveway that matched the description of a car seen near the crime scene. When Rosalind answered the door and saw the officers, she appeared nervous. However, after learning the reason for their visit, she insisted that Daryl had stayed with her all night and had not left the house. Since there was no physical evidence to hold Daryl, the investigators decided to interview the main witnesses, Daryl and Tiffany's daughters, Diamond and Denia. They were still struggling to cope with the trauma. Denia was mostly silent, experienced nightmares, and couldn't sleep without the lights on. Diamond seemed to handle things better but would break down in tears whenever the conversation shifted to that tragic night. To help them, a skilled psychologist was brought in to gently support the sisters through their trauma, and over time, they began to share their experiences. They revealed that while staying with their father, they often saw a mysterious man delivering folders of papers to him. One day, when their father stepped out, they couldn't resist their curiosity and peeked inside the folders, discovering photos of their home, pictures of their mother in various locations around town, and even images of Ben's house. This leads them to realize that their father has employed a private investigator to follow their mother, Tiffany. Even more concerning was the fact that just 2 days before Tiffany's death, she had won full custody of the twins in court, requiring Daryl to pay child support, a situation he strongly opposed. With this new evidence, the police obtained a warrant for Daryl's arrest. Given his known history with firearms and the likelihood that he might resist, the officers decided it would be safer to arrest him at work, where security was tight, minimizing the risk of an armed confrontation. When the officers arrived, Daryl appeared shocked but did not resist arrest. He calmly allowed them to handcuff him and requested to speak with a lawyer. Initially, both he and Rosalind denied any involvement in the crime. However, investigators found phone records and GPS data showing they were both near the crime scene that night. Rosalind was the first to cooperate. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to testify against Daryl, stating that she had not known his exact intentions, she had merely driven him to the location and waited in the car. When she heard a loud noise, she panicked and drove off but slowed down to let Daryl jump in before fleeing. She claimed that she later provided him with an alibi out of fear for her own safety. Daryl faced charges of first-degree homicide, which could lead to the death penalty. In an attempt to escape this severe punishment, he tried to shift the blame. Upon learning that Rosalind had testified against him, he accused her of having an affair with his adult son and claimed that they had conspired to frame him. He was willing to implicate his own son in a serious crime to save himself. However, investigators quickly disproved his claims by thoroughly examining the evidence and confirming that his son had no involvement in the events of that night. With no alternatives available, Daryl eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. In April 2017, at the age of 49, he was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after at least 25 years. One morning in September 2019, police arrived at a quiet home in Pennsylvania to check on someone who had not been responding to calls. From the outside, everything seemed normal, Both the windows were closed and the curtains were drawn, but no one answered the door. When the officers entered the house, they were unsettled by what they found: blood on the floors, towels soaked with stains, and obvious signs of violence. As they moved upstairs, they were confronted with a scene much worse than they had anticipated. Margaret Sumney was born on June 28, 1952, in Pittsburgh. She grew up in her family's dance studio, a lively center of creativity that was beloved by the community. The studio was more than just a place of work, it was like a second home to her. Eventually, Margaret became a ballet instructor, helping to manage the studio and organizing beloved Christmas performances that turned into a local tradition. Her warmth and enthusiasm left a significant impact on everyone she encountered. With a magnetic personality, she always appeared polished, composed. Despite life's challenges, Margaret remained resilient and purposeful. In her early adulthood, Margaret married. Unfortunately, their relationship quickly fell apart due to his emotional unavailability and irresponsibility. After their divorce, Margaret became a single mother to 2 daughters. With no help from their father, she took on all the responsibilities of parenting while also working at the studio. Despite these challenges, she provided a loving and structured home for her daughters. Years later, Margaret met another man, a charming dentist and Harvard graduate. His charisma and apparent commitment gave Margaret the stability she had been seeking. They married in 1986, created a life filled with financial security and comfort in a well-furnished home in Pennsylvania. In 1989, they welcomed a son, David Sumney. Her husband actively participated in raising David, and he also developed a strong bond with Margaret's daughters. Although their blended family seemed to thrive on the outside, the reality inside the home was different. David was raised without boundaries. From a young age, all his wishes were immediately fulfilled, whether it was toys, vacations, or treats. As he grew older, he started demanding them, learning how to manipulate others to get what he wanted. Even simple tasks became negotiable, and he refused to do them without a reward. He had no understanding of gratitude or responsibility, his only concern was his own benefit. One particularly alarming incident occurred when he found a bird in the backyard and squeezed it to death. Margaret was horrified by his complete lack of remorse, nervously joked with family members about him potentially becoming a criminal. However, her humor masked her genuine concern. David showed no empathy or guilt. Without intervention, these troubling traits only became more pronounced as he grew older. By 2001, Margaret's marriage had quietly ended in divorce, which, while amicable, brought an end to the stability Margaret had worked so hard to achieve. Financially, the family fell apart. Her husband stopped providing support, and the dance studio that had once been central to their lives was no longer viable, forcing Margaret to close it down. With limited resources, she took a job at a clothing store to meet basic needs, a humble but necessary step. Meanwhile, David's sense of entitlement grew. Despite the family's financial struggles, he continued to expect special treatment and exhibited unchanged behavior. Even while dealing with his own financial issues, his father financially supported him at a significant personal cost, justifying it as a way to maintain their fragile bond and often giving in to his son's demands. Although Margaret and her husband no longer lived together, they remained emotionally connected, trapped in a cycle of responding to David's volatile moods. He moved easily between both homes, exploiting their desire for harmony and love. Over the years, David's influence over his parents intensified. Despite their declining finances, increasing instability, neither parent adjusted their approach. The family dynamic had shifted completely, with their lives revolving around managing their son's feelings and minimizing his outbursts. In 2008, at 19 years old, David began studying mathematics at George Washington University. His parents, who had faced many hardships, were hopeful that higher education and a structured setting would improve his behavior. Despite the high costs of housing, tuition, and living expenses, his parents supported him financially. In 2010, Margaret visited Washington, D.C. to see her son. During this visit, she called her daughter, Ellen, from a hospital, claiming that David had attempted to harm himself with a knife and that she had injured her head in the process. However, Margaret's account was inconsistent. She was evasive, defensive about the details. When Ellen arrived, she found her mother and brother in different hospital rooms, which was unusual and unexplained. The medical staff were not forthcoming with information. Ellen started to worry that David's violent behavior had escalated, possibly directed at their mother. Despite her concerns, no investigation was initiated, and the incident went unexamined. Soon after, David was expelled from the university due to ongoing absenteeism and repeated rule violations. This news devastated his parents, as all their emotional, financial, and psychological efforts had ended in another failure. David returned to Pennsylvania, shuttling between his parents' homes without showing any signs of improvement. In July 2015, 26-year-old David hit a new low in his life. He was unemployed, lacked motivation, and depended entirely on his parents. When he asked his father for a substantial amount of money for a vacation and was turned down, things escalated violently. David physically assaulted his father, viciously beating him in their home. Neighbors, disturbed by the noise, called the police. Upon arrival, the officers found David on top of his father, hitting him. His father suffered severe injuries, including brain hemorrhaging, spinal damage, and significant internal injuries. As a result, he was left unable to walk or care for himself and had to be moved to a long-term nursing facility. David was arrested at the scene and charged with aggravated assault. He was released shortly after posting bail. The father he nearly killed could no longer communicate for himself. Despite the violent attack, David faced minimal consequences. With little legal opposition and a family too shattered to resist, he walked away free, unchanged, unrepentant, more emboldened than ever. Afterward, he began telling people that he had joined the U.S. Navy. Although this story seemed odd, Margaret held on to it. For her, the idea of military service represented hope, a structured, disciplined path that could save her son from his troubled state. However, there was no evidence of any enlistment. He didn't provide any documents, wear a uniform, or answer questions about his claimed service. Every time someone asked, his responses were vague and unverifiable. At the same time, David was undergoing a physical transformation. He became obsessed with strength training, quickly gaining a lot of muscle. Now nearly 6.5 feet tall and heavily built, he appeared as intimidating as his behavior had become. As his physical strength increased, his aggression followed suit. David grew more unpredictable, volatile. Conversations with him were filled with hostility, subtle threats, and direct attempts to control those around him. He made it clear that any pushback would be met with force. Margaret, exhausted from years of fear, confusion, and love. She stayed by his side, still hoping for the return of the son she once knew. But by then, control was lost for her and the rest of the family. David was no longer just difficult or spoiled, he had become dangerous. No one seemed able or willing to stop him. In November 2016, another terrifying incident occurred at Margaret's home. Late one night, David, who was very drunk, entered her bedroom and began to strangle her while she slept. The attack was sudden and violent. Due to his large size and strength, Margaret struggled to fight back. However, she managed to break free and scream for help. David left the room without saying anything, returned to his own. Margaret then called the police. When they arrived, they found David asleep, smelling strongly of alcohol. Margaret had visible bruises, finger marks on her neck and ribs. She recounted the attack to the officers, mentioning that David had referred to a Navy SEAL reference. David was arrested, and the situation was classified as domestic violence with aggravating factors. However, Margaret intervened again. Concerned that a felony charge would jeopardize her son's future, she urged the prosecutors to lessen the charges. She argued that he was under the influence and needed rehabilitation instead of imprisonment. She also pushed the idea, though unverified, that David had served in the U.S. Navy, presenting it as a sign of his potential. Her plea was convincing enough for the court to reduce the felony charge to a lesser offense, allowing David to avoid severe punishment. During court proceedings, an official background check revealed a shocking truth: David had never served in any branch of the military. The story he had told for years was entirely false. There was no record of him being recruited, enlisted, or trained. His military persona was a deliberate lie, used to hide his failures and violent tendencies. Despite this, Margaret still believed her son could change. David received a 16-month sentence, marking his first genuine consequence. While in prison, he portrayed himself as someone struggling with addiction, rather than his aggressive behavior. He claimed that alcohol was the source of his problems, not a lack of empathy or violent impulses. This approach worked for him. A social worker supported his transfer to a rehabilitation facility instead of prison, and the court granted it. At the Pennsylvania Recovery Center, David was put under structured supervision. He participated in therapy sessions and group activities. Margaret visited regularly, bringing supplies and defending her son. She saw the rehabilitation as a potential turning point. She hoped that if he completed the program, the worst would be behind him. After finishing treatment, David moved into transitional housing, quickly got a job. Progress reports indicated that he followed the rules and showed signs of adjustment. To his hopeful family, he appeared reformed. However, this appearance was only skin deep. Beneath the good behavior was the same manipulative person. David never truly accepted responsibility for his past, never showed genuine remorse, and never acknowledged the pain he caused. By 2018, David Summey's carefully crafted image was beginning to fall apart, though not fast enough for anyone to notice. In August, his father passed away at the age of 74 in a Pennsylvania nursing home. The official cause of death was listed as age-related health issues. However, those who knew the family understood that the real reason stemmed from a severe beating he suffered in 2015 at the hands of his son. This violent act resulted in the loss of his independence, ability to work, and dignity. His health steadily declined, could not be reversed. While the family never discussed it openly, there was a shared understanding that David's attack had dramatically altered his father's identity. Throughout this time, David faced no new charges and felt no remorse. At the funeral, Margaret remained composed and did not speak out against her son, which created tension among family members. They were baffled as to why she would continue to protect someone who had caused such pain. For them, it was not just a personal tragedy, but also a systemic failure. They believed law enforcement acted too late, the courts were too lenient, and Margaret's instinct to protect may have allowed a dangerous individual to continue endangering others. In 2019, David started a new relationship using a dating app. The woman moved in with him shortly after they met. At first, he seemed to have changed for the better. He was charming, respectful, and attentive. However, this behavior didn't last long. He soon became controlling and aggressive, closely monitoring her actions, imposing strict rules in their home. She noticed something troubling. David was writing checks in the name of his mother, Margaret. He claimed that Margaret had mental health issues and that he was handling her finances, even going so far as to forge her signature when necessary. However, there was no legal documentation, such as a power of attorney or a court order, to back up his claims. When his girlfriend voiced her concerns, he dismissed them, saying there were delays with the paperwork. Although she suspected he was committing fraud, she did not have enough evidence to report him to the authorities. As their relationship deteriorated and she prepared to leave, David reacted with anger. Fearing rejection, he insisted she meet him at a hotel in Atlantic City. Once there, he became abusive. Over several days, he physically attacked her, strangled her until she lost consciousness, and kept her captive without any means to get help. At one point, believing he had killed her, he abandoned the room. She lay injured and unresponsive until a concerned housekeeper, troubled by the prolonged "Do Not Disturb" sign, entered the room. The housekeeper discovered that she was alive, but in critical condition. She was taken to the hospital, and the police began an investigation. On July 16, 2019, an arrest warrant for David was issued, but due to a crucial mistake, the warrant wasn't entered into the federal database. This oversight allowed David to return to Pennsylvania without being identified as a fugitive. Days later, He was arrested on unrelated charges but was released because the warrant was not in the system. The protective measures designed to help the woman. The failure to communicate between agencies led to tragic outcomes. On September 1, 2019, one of Margaret's sisters tried to contact her several times, but her calls went unanswered. Worried, she contacted Margaret's eldest daughter, Ellen, who was also unable to reach her mother. By the morning of September 2, Ellen's anxiety grew as she continued trying to contact Margaret. Eventually, David answered the phone and stated that Margaret was asleep, refusing to let her speak to anyone. His tone was emotionless, which worried her. Ellen decided to contact local authorities to request a welfare check. When the police arrived at Margaret's home, everything seemed quiet. The windows were shut, and no one answered the door. After a few minutes, the officers forced their way inside and immediately sensed that something was amiss. A foul odor filled the air, blood stains were visible in several rooms, and there were drag marks suggesting an attempt to clean up or conceal something. Upstairs, they found Margaret in the bathtub. She had been dead for over 24 hours. She suffered broken ribs, a broken spine, cuts to her face and bruising all over her body. An autopsy report concluded that Margaret Summy died from blunt force trauma and her death was declared a homicide. Blood was on the walls and floors. In the hallway, investigators discovered a sickle with what appeared to be blood on it. A revolver that belonged to Margaret was missing, leaving only its empty ammunition box behind. Forensic experts carefully analyzed the scene. The amount of blood, attempts to clean up, and the arrangement of items suggested that this was not just a violent incident, but also a well-planned one. This was not an impulsive act, it was intentional and methodical. When questioned by police, David Summy denied any involvement in his mother's death. Instead, he said it was likely an accident or a drug overdose. When detectives described Ms. Summy's injuries, David Summy suggested that his mother had been dating a man and that he should be investigated. However, when police downloaded the contents of Summy's cell phone, they found hundreds of pictures of his mother being beaten to death. Assistant District Attorney Michael Pradines said the first photo was taken at 4:50 a.m. on August 30th. Interspersed among many of the victims' photos are selfies of the defendant, in which the defendant is seen with his face covered in blood, and in one photo he is seen giving a thumbs up, the prosecutor said. Pradines said investigators also found a video on his phone recorded at 2:41 a.m. on September 1, 2019, of David Summy washing his mother's body in the bathtub. In addition to the photos, his browsing history provided incriminating information. He had searched for ways to clean blood from surfaces, how human bodies decompose, and strategies to avoid detection in homes. David conducted searches on his phone at 11:11 a.m. on August 30, 2019, including the phrase, "How long does it take before a body starts to decompose?" He had also looked up chemical odor neutralizers and information on mummification. Rather than panicking, David had planned ahead. The brutality of the crime and the calculated nature of his actions painted a psychological picture of someone without a conscience, remorse, or restraint. Investigators were certain of his guilt, but their challenge was to apprehend him. Police reached out to Ellen, the only person still occasionally in touch with David, asked for her assistance in setting a trap. She agreed. When he showed up, officers arrested him immediately. They found Margaret's checks and pieces of her jewelry among his belongings. He was formally charged with third-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, theft, and related offenses. A psychiatric evaluation determined that he was fit to stand trial. November 17, 2022, David pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, admitted his guilt, and received a sentence of 20 to 40 years in prison. With time already served, he would be eligible for parole in 2039, around his 50th birthday. David also faces another criminal case in Atlantic City, where his ex-girlfriend said he waterboarded and strangled her in a hotel room in July 2019. For Margaret's surviving relatives, this outcome felt like a betrayal. Given the horror of the crime, the photographic evidence, the forensic findings, and the digital trace, they believed he should have faced harsher charges. Margaret's daughters and sisters publicly criticized the deal and called the sentence insufficient. Ellen said, "For someone who seems to enjoy killing people, with a history of violence, he should never be out in society again." In court, David made a short statement where he expressed regret and claimed he couldn't comprehend how he committed his actions. However, his apology felt insincere. For Margaret Summey's family, this was not a moment of madness. It was the tragic culmination of a lifetime filled with manipulation, abuse, and ignored warning signs. Margaret's life ended not abruptly, but following a prolonged and preventable decline. She was not killed by a stranger, but by the very child she had always stood up for. Ellen has cut all ties with her brother, who is now a convicted murderer and no longer resembles the family member she once knew. What remains is not only profound grief but also the heavy burden of realizing that this tragedy could have been avoided. The tragic murder of Margaret Sumney is a harrowing reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked violence and systemic failures. Margaret, a loving mother, ballet teacher, and pillar of her Pennsylvania community, endured years of increasingly violent assault, manipulation, and abuse at the hands of her son, culminating in her brutal death. Despite numerous warning signs, from David's lack of empathy as a child to his violent attacks on his father and mother, the continued leniency of the legal system and Margaret's unwavering hope for redemption allowed his dangerous behavior to continue. The gruesome evidence, including photographs and videos David took during the crime, revealed a calculated and remorseless act, but his plea agreement to third-degree murder and his 20 to 40-year sentence left Margaret's family feeling betrayed by a justice system that failed to deliver proportionate consequences. This case highlights the urgent need for early intervention in cases of domestic violence, stricter enforcement of legal accountability, and increased awareness of manipulative behaviors that can escalate into tragedy. Margaret's legacy, defined by her warmth and resilience, lives on in the memories of those she touched, but her story is a wake-up call to prevent such preventable losses in the future. It was a regular afternoon at Danvers's high school. Most students had already left, and the hallways were quiet. But inside a second-floor bathroom, something terrible was happening. A well-loved teacher had just finished her last class of the day. She had no idea that one of her students was watching her. Minutes later, security cameras caught something strange, him walking out with his hood up and hands covered in blood. He moved through the school as if nothing had happened, casually talking to classmates, grabbing his things, and disappearing into the night. No one knew the dark secret he had just left behind, not yet. Philip Chisholm was born on January 21, 1999, in Tennessee. From a young age, he showed a keen interest in sports, and by the time he entered high school, he had already made a name for himself as a talented soccer player. His skills on the field were undeniable. In 2012, his teammates credited him as the driving force behind their championship win in the league. To those around him, Philip seemed like a friendly yet reserved young man. No one suspected that beneath his quiet demeanor, he was battling deep personal struggles. Philip's home life was far from stable. His father, a former military officer, had succumbed to alcoholism and frequently subjected him to both physical and emotional abuse. Heated arguments with his wife, Diana Chisholm, were a regular occurrence. By the fall of 2013, the tension had reached a breaking point. They decided to separate. Philip was uprooted from the life he knew and moved with his mother to a small town in Massachusetts, while his father relocated to Florida. As part of their divorce agreement, his father was permitted only limited visitation with Philip. Practically overnight, his world had changed completely. Adjusting to a new environment proved difficult for Philip. Already introverted, he struggled to find his place at his new school. Socializing didn't come easily to him, but over time, he began to open up. He gradually integrated into school life, even trying out for the basketball team. Though he made friends, he was selective about whom he spent time with, limiting his conversations in class to only a few people he deemed trustworthy. He stayed away from alcohol and banned substance, never drawing much attention to himself. However, beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Philip found academics particularly challenging. Rather than engaging with his lessons, he often retreated into his own world, sketching in his notebook and listening to music instead of paying attention in class. It was during this time that Colleen Ritzer, one of the most beloved teachers at the school, noticed this new student. Known for her ability to connect with students, Colleen had dreamed of becoming a teacher from a young age. Excelling in mathematics, she pursued it as her career, earning her degree in mathematics with a specialization in secondary education, and began teaching 8th grade math that same year. Her dedication to her students was unmistakable. She frequently stayed after school to offer extra help and used social media to engage with them. When Philip arrived at the school, Colleen quickly noticed his academic struggles. Understanding that he was going through a rough time, she saw potential in him and believed he just needed some guidance to get back on track. However, unlike most of his classmates, Philip showed no interest in her efforts. On the morning of October 22, 2013, Philip arrived at Danvers's high school carrying multiple bags. Inside them were gloves, a change of clothes, a mask, and a box cutter, items that had nothing to do with schoolwork. Later that day, he attended Colleen's class. When the lesson was over, she approached him, offering to stay after class to help him prepare for an upcoming test. Philip's reaction was anything but appreciative. Instead, he erupted into an angry outburst. Colleen attempted to calm him down, but he stormed off. At around 3 p.m., Colleen went to the bathroom, unaware that Philip was closely following her. By that time, most students had left the school. Philip quietly entered the bathroom wearing gloves and holding a box cutter. Suddenly, he attacked Colleen, covering her mouth with a cloth to silence her. He overpowered her and stabbed her at least 16 times. The assault was interrupted when another student entered the bathroom. She saw Philip but assumed he was just changing for soccer practice, not realizing the violence happening nearby. She left without raising an alarm, unknowingly encountering a murderer. Then, Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and one hand covered in blood. He headed toward the school parking lot with a sinister plan to find a dumpster to dispose of the body. On his way, he casually greeted several friends, who had no idea about the horrific crime he had just committed. Soon after, he changed out of his clothes, putting on a white t-shirt and a red hoodie. With a recycling bin in hand, he returned to the bathroom. This time, he came out, made his way to the elevator and hiding his teacher's lifeless body. After leaving the school, Philip took the recycling bin to a secluded wooded area. There, he disguised Colleen's body with a tree branch and covered her remains with dry leaves. He also left a vague note that said, "I hate everyone." Acting normally, he returned to the school. Although his messy appearance should have raised concern, no one noticed anything unusual, allowing him to collect his belongings from his locker and leave without any interruptions. Philip thought he had gotten away with the perfect crime, but he was very wrong. Hours later, his mother started to worry when she realized he was missing. She went to the nearest police station to file a missing person report. At the same time, his soccer teammates noticed he wasn't at practice and began to search for him, becoming increasingly anxious. The police responded quickly and asked Philip's phone provider to track his last known location. The signal was traced to the area near Hollywood Hits Theater. Investigators went there and found that he had bought a movie ticket before disappearing. Shortly after that, his phone went offline at 9 p.m. The principal of Danvers High School emailed staff about Philip's disappearance. Shortly after, a math teacher called her with worrying news. Colleen Ritzer's parents also reported that she did not return home. This was particularly concerning because Philip had been in Colleen's last class that day, raising fears that they may have been together before they both disappeared. Colleen's parents were desperately trying to contact her, but their calls went unanswered. By around 11 p.m., they formally reported her missing. Police tracked Colleen's phone to the school area, noting the coincidence of two missing persons from the same school. This led them to investigate further. Their investigation took a troubling turn when they found Colleen's car still parked at the school, indicating something was wrong. While searching the building, they examined the second-floor bathroom and encountered a horrifying scene. Bloodstains covered the area, and Colleen's purse was left behind. A blood-spattered recycling bin was also found in the corner. Following this grim evidence, officers searched the woods behind the school and discovered blood-soaked clothing that belonged to Colleen. This evidence confirmed that a serious crime had occurred. Authorities quickly began questioning students and staff in hopes of finding witnesses. A student came forward to share an unsettling incident he had overheard between Philip and Colleen while he was organizing his locker. He noticed Philip was raising his voice at Colleen, who was trying to calm him down. The student thought Philip's anger might have been triggered by Colleen's question about his family, which unintentionally reminded him of his parents' divorce. Even though Colleen quickly moved on to a different topic, Philip continued to seem upset and began muttering to himself. The student felt that something was wrong but never thought Philip could become violent. A female student came forward with important information. She told investigators she saw the back of a person who appeared to be changing clothes. The person's rear end was exposed, with clothes piled on the floor in the bathroom that afternoon. Additionally, a mother who was picking up her child around 3:30 p.m. reported seeing Philip quickly leaving the school. This evidence suggested that something had occurred between Philip and Colleen. Detectives then reviewed the school's surveillance footage to understand the timeline of events leading up to their disappearances. The footage revealed alarming details. At 7:45 a.m., Philip arrived at school carrying several bags, which he stored in his locker. Then, at 2:54 p.m., Colleen was seen leaving a classroom and heading towards the second-floor bathroom. Just a minute later, Philip appeared in the hallway, watching her closely before briefly returning to the classroom. Moments after that, he came back into view with his hood up and followed her into the bathroom while putting on gloves. At 3:06 p.m., a female student was seen entering the bathroom and quickly exiting moments later. At 3:07 p.m., Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and walked to the parking lot. He returned 2 minutes later, now wearing a white t-shirt. After a few minutes, he was spotted again, this time in a red hoodie. At 3:16 p.m., he went back into the bathroom with a recycling bin. By 3:22 p.m., security footage showed him wearing a ski mask as he pushed the bin into the elevator. Shortly after, he was seen dragging it outside toward the student parking lot. Later that evening, Philip returned to the school, entered the bathroom again, and changed clothes. This time, he was barefoot, wearing a black hoodie. When investigators finished reviewing the footage, they were certain of one thing: Colleen had entered the bathroom but did not come out. In contrast, Philip had repeatedly entered and exited, changing his clothes each time and pushing a large bin on one occasion. Coupled with the blood evidence found in the bathroom, the conclusion was clear: Colleen had been murdered, and Philip was their main suspect. Law enforcement quickly began searching for Philip, who was still missing. They checked security footage from the school and nearby streets to see if they could find any signs of his movements. Simultaneously, they monitored Colleen Ritzer's bank account since Philip had stolen her wallet along with her credit cards, indicating he might have already used them. Their suspicions were confirmed when they found that Colleen's card had been used to buy a burger, fries, and a drink. A movie ticket was also purchased, and location data from Philip's phone showed he was at the theater shortly after the crime occurred. While police worked to find him, an unexpected turn of events happened. Around 2:30 a.m. on October 23rd, an officer in a nearby town saw a young man walking along the highway at the intersection of Route 1, North and Salem Road. It was Philip, aimlessly wandering without a clear direction. The officer recognized him from the missing person alert and stopped to ask questions. During a search, the officer found Colleen Ritzer's credit card and driver's license in Philip's possession. Additionally, his pants still had blood stains on them. He was promptly taken into custody and brought to the local police station. When officers searched Philip's backpack, they discovered Colleen's purse, her underwear, and a box cutter with dried blood on it. Alarmingly, there were also traces of semen and blood on Philip's own underwear. When interrogated about the blood, Philip coldly remarked, "It's from the girl," referring to Colleen, his teacher. He showed no remorse and proceeded to inform the police that her body was buried in the woods. At 3 a.m., a team of officers went to the wooded area behind Danvers High School. After searching for some time, they noticed a pile of leaves and debris. One officer spotted a thumb with pink nail polish sticking out from the leaves. When they removed the foliage, they were met with a horrifying scene. Colleen's lifeless body was lying on her back, her throat cut, and a tree branch had violated her remains. Her face and body showed signs of severe trauma. Nearby, officers found a pair of blood-soaked white gloves and a handwritten note that stated, "I hate everyone." Colleen's remains were quickly taken for forensic examination. The autopsy revealed she had suffered 16 stab wounds and had been abuse-assaulted twice. Philip was immediately charged with aggravated assault, armed robbery, and first-degree murder. He was held without bail. That morning, on October 23rd, police visited Philip's mother at her new apartment, which she had moved into after leaving Tennessee due to her divorce. She appeared very upset and acknowledged that the separation had been hard for both her and Philip. Later, through his attorney, she released a statement offering her condolences to Colleen's family. In contrast, Philip's uncle took a different view. He suggested that something must have triggered his nephew's actions, arguing that teenagers can be quick to anger, and noted that Philip was only 14 years old. He characterized Philip as a well-behaved child from a good family, seemingly minimizing the seriousness of the situation. Philip's former soccer coach shared similar feelings, saying he wanted to learn the full story before judging the teenager. Meanwhile, a student, Rania Ridui, found it hard to comprehend the tragedy. She couldn't understand why anyone would hurt Colleen, who she described as kind and caring. Colleen's family was heartbroken and in deep mourning. On October 28, 2013, the community came together to pay their respects at her funeral at St. Augustine Church. The service was very emotional and attended by nearly 1,000 people, including 400 of Colleen's students from Danvers High School, many of whom wore pink, her favorite color. The entrance to the church was decorated with pink flowers, symbolizing the love and admiration she inspired in those who knew her. Colleen's cousin spoke passionately about the large turnout at Colleen's funeral, which highlighted the significant impact she had on her community. She noted that even though Colleen had a brief life, she made a lasting impression on education, inspiring many students with her dedication and love for teaching. She also emphasized Colleen's strong bond with her siblings, her commitment to being a supportive friend and mentor. With deep sorrow and respect, Colleen's cousin described Colleen as the ideal person any parent would wish for their child to become. The Reverend provided words of comfort, encouraging attendees to focus on the meaningful life Colleen led rather than the tragic way it ended. His message resonated with those grieving, reminding them to celebrate the positivity Colleen brought to the world. Months later, at a juvenile detention center in Boston, Philip committed another crime. On June 2, 2014, he entered a staff locker room bathroom and tried to strangle a 29-year-old medical staff member and attack her with a pencil. It took several employees to restrain him while he screamed threats, including, "I'm going to kill all of you." Although he didn't succeed in killing her, she was left seriously injured. A new case was opened against him, but he was still facing charges for the murder of Colleen Ritzer before going to trial for this attack. Philip's defense attorney admitted that he had killed the teacher but argued that he should not be held criminally responsible. She claimed he was experiencing a psychotic episode and suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the murder, even stating that he had heard voices beforehand. The prosecutor strongly disagreed, asserting that Philip did not have any mental illness and presented surveillance footage as evidence. The videos showed him carefully following Colleen into the bathroom, attacking her, and then coldly placing her body into a recycling bin before wheeling it outside. The prosecutor also highlighted that after the murder, Philip casually greeted friends, ate a meal, and watched a movie while carrying evidence of his crime in his backpack. After considering the prosecution's argument, the court rejected the defense's claim of criminal insanity, ruling that Philip was mentally competent to stand trial. Since the minimum age for criminal prosecution in the United States is 14, he could be tried as an adult. On December 15, 2015, a jury found Philip guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and armed robbery. As the judge read the verdict, Philip stood silently, his hands cuffed and his expression blank. Colleen's mother, heartbroken by his lack of remorse, declared that Philip was truly evil and beyond rehabilitation. Their family will never get a second chance with Colleen, and he shouldn't get one either, she said. Despite these emotional statements, Philip showed no reaction. He did not flinch or show any empathy or regret for the life he had taken or the family he had devastated. On February 26, 2016, despite the defense team arguing that Philip was mentally ill, he was convicted of killing Colleen Ritzer and sentenced to 40 to 60 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years, a sentence that Colleen's family felt was not harsh enough. However, this was not his last sentencing. On April 26, 2024, a decade later, he faced trial again for attempting to murder a medical worker at the Boston Juvenile Facility. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as his attorney declared that Philip wanted to take full responsibility and resolve the case quickly. Despite this, it was evident to everyone that he lacked genuine remorse. The medical worker he attacked described him as a monster and a remorseless killer. She recounted the terrifying incident, stating that he intended to kill her. During her testimony, she revealed that his face still haunted her as a constant reminder of the trauma he caused. She pleaded with the court to keep Philip in prison for life, so no one else would suffer at his hands. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Philip to an additional 17 to 20 years for the attack, to be served concurrently with his original sentence for Colleen's murder. To this day, Philip remains in prison, serving time for the crimes he committed against two women who only tried to help him, but were met with unimaginable violence instead. Colleen's family chose to celebrate her memory instead of focusing on their sorrow after her tragic death. 1 year following her murder, they created a scholarship in her honor. In a public statement, they remembered Colleen as a kind and caring young woman whose love for teaching defined her life. They take comfort in knowing that her legacy lives on. Many students who have received the scholarship are pursuing teaching careers, inspired by Colleen's dedication and passion for education. Although she is no longer, her influence remains strong in the classrooms and hearts of those who knew her. In October 2024, Chisholm's attorneys appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, arguing that brain scan evidence of mental illness had been wrongly excluded. On February 25, 2025, the SJC denied a new trial, upholding Chisholm's conviction and 40-year parole. Ritzer's family expressed relief, stating the ruling allowed them to grieve without appeal uncertainties. The brutal murder of Colleen Ritzer at Danvers High School left an indelible scar on her family, students, and community, shattering the illusion of safety in a place meant for learning. Yet, from this tragedy, Colleen's radiant legacy endures through the scholarship bearing her name, inspiring future educators to carry forward her passion and kindness. Philip Chisholm, whose cold indifference and violent acts stole a beloved teacher's life, remains behind bars, his 2025 appeal denial ensuring accountability for his crimes. As Danvers continues to heal, the memory of Colleen, her infectious smile, unwavering dedication, and boundless compassion, lives on, a beacon of light that no darkness can extinguish. Shanti Cooper was a devoted mother to her son, Jackson, 8, who she shared custody of with her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. After separating from Jim in 2013, Shanti was ready to begin dating again. She quickly realized that online dating had become the common way to meet people, so she decided to give it a try by creating a chat account. While exploring different profiles on the site, Shanti connected with a few men, but none impressed her quite like David Trance. David had also recently ended a year-long marriage, was looking for something fresh and exciting. Their relationship deepened through phone calls, text messages, and emails. After several months of getting to know each other, David made a significant decision to move to Orlando, Florida, to be closer to Shanti. Their relationship evolved into something more intimate, while Shanti remained committed to her son. She made sure that her time with David didn't compromise her responsibilities as a mother, always putting Jackson's well-being first and ensuring that everyone understood the importance of a healthy family dynamic. In 2015, Shanti and David relocated to Delaney Park, an upscale suburb close to downtown Orlando. This neighborhood is known for its beautiful environment and family-friendly atmosphere, attracting an affluent community. Delaney Park offers a high-quality lifestyle along with an excellent school system that delivers quality education. Its well-maintained landscapes and access to various amenities make it an attractive choice for families looking for a comfortable and safe home. In here, David bought a house for $600,000 in cash. The home is 4,000 square feet, featuring a pool, a garage, and an apartment above it. This spacious property offered them a comfortable living space with plenty of amenities. Shanti and David were excited to settle into their new house and start a new chapter in their lives. However, they soon noticed that some features of the home did not meet their expectations for the future. While they loved their new house, the upstairs bedrooms felt small and were not very functional. Facing this challenge, David and Shanti began a renovation project to turn their house into their dream home. Shanti, passionate about design and home improvement, agreed to fund the project. They hired a skilled team of contractors who completely dismantled the house to rebuild the upstairs bedrooms and create a new layout that met their vision. During the renovation, the bedrooms were unusable, so Shanti moved into the apartment above the garage. This arrangement allowed her to maintain her daily routine without interruption and provided a dedicated workspace. David, on the other hand, stayed in a makeshift area in the garage, spending quality time with their dogs. David became deeply invested in the restoration. It was no longer just a project but a vital part of his life. He spent every waking moment monitoring the work, making adjustments, ensuring every detail was carefully planned and executed. His entire focus was on the renovation, and the house began to take on a character of its own. In 2018, 3 years after starting the renovation project, there was barely any progress. The inside of the house had been completely stripped down, leaving only the bare structure. Seeking a solution, David reached out to a local home renovator known from the successful A&E reality show, Zombie House Flipping. This show features real estate investors who buy and renovate rundown homes. The show's producer contacted David and Shanti about their home in Delaney Park to see if it could be included in the next season. During the chaos of their home renovations, David and Shanti got married in 2017, which surprised many friends and family. Shanti, who is naturally private, even kept the marriage a secret from her beloved grandmother. By mid-April 2018, the show Zombie House Flipping planned to start filming at David and Shanti's home in May. However, the producer struggled to get them to discuss how the show would proceed. The producer noticed a clear contrast between David's excitement and Shanti's apparent disinterest. David was eager about the flipping series, while Shanti seemed to participate just to support her husband. The tension over their home was evident, as Shanti had invested a lot of money in the renovations, yet her name wasn't even on the trust that owned the house. Although David promised to include Shanti on the trust, he did not follow through, leading to further issues in their relationship. By the end of April 2018, David and Shanti seemed to be doing well. However, on April 24, 2018, at 3:51 p.m., David called 911 in a panic, saying he had found his wife, Shanti, in the bathtub and that she wasn't breathing. During the call, David's screams were audible as he desperately tried to explain the situation. When the police arrived at their home, they discovered Shanti had passed away in the bathtub. The area was secured, and an investigation began, while David was taken to the police station for questioning. David recounted to investigators that the morning had started normally. He said Shanti woke up between 7 and 7:30 a.m. At around 9:30 a.m., he left for a 1-hour walk, leaving Shanti at home. When he returned, he claimed he took measurements for renovations. After that, David stated he left again around noon to take their dogs to an off-leash dog park near the Orlando Executive Airport. He mentioned that he frequently visited this park to let the dogs play and enjoy the open space. He added that he hadn't spoken to Shanti before leaving the house and assumed she was in the garage apartment relaxing. David told the detectives that after returning home from the dog park, he went outside to do yard work. He worked for about 30 minutes before deciding to go inside. Once inside, he heard water coming from the bathroom, which intrigued him, so he went to check it out. As he approached, he noticed that the bathroom door was slightly open. When he pushed it open, he was shocked to find his wife, Shanti, unconscious in the bathtub, with her body partially submerged in water. In a panic, he called 911 to report what he had found. During the interview, David mentioned that Shanti had been excited about their future and the plans they had for their home. They were both looking forward to a happy life together. Although David seemed distraught and his account of finding Shanti appeared credible, the detective had doubts. There were inconsistencies in his story that raised concerns. When police officers arrived at Trant's home after David's call, they noticed that the bathroom was completely dry, which would be unusual if David had genuinely tried to save his wife from a bathtub filled with water. This detail cast doubt on the truth of David's account. The extent of Shanti's injuries contradicted David's explanation of how she fell into the tub. When her body was examined at the crime scene, it was clear she had extensive blood and bruises that couldn't be attributed to just a fall. An autopsy determined that Shanti died from blunt force trauma and strangulation, marking her death as a homicide. These inconsistencies led the detective to question David about the differences in his account. The detective questioned David about the blood found on Shanti's bed. David claimed it was from her menstrual cycle, but the amount discovered was puzzling and raised more doubts. The detectives explored various theories about why David might have killed Shanti. To provoke a response from David, the detective inquired if their ongoing home renovations had anything to do with Shanti's death, but David denied any connection. The detective also asked if Shanti was upset with David because her name was not on the house title. David insisted that Shanti had no problem with that. The detective began to suspect that Shanti's death might be linked to her life insurance policy, which would pay out $250,000 to David. During the interview, detectives asked David whether Shanti's death was an accident related to rough intercourse. He denied harming her in any way. Despite his denial, the detectives believed there was enough evidence to implicate him in Shanti's murder. They thought he had pretended to cry during the 911 call and the interview to divert suspicion. However, before David left the police station, he agreed to take a polygraph test. It was late at night, and the detectives couldn't find a polygrapher to conduct the test right away, so they allowed David to go home. Before he left, he provided DNA samples, nail clippings, and fingerprints to the detectives for analysis and comparison with evidence from the crime scene. The detectives hoped these samples would help them find more evidence linking David to Shanti's murder. Investigators who looked into the crime scene at David and Shanti's home found several notable details. Shanti had one earring still on and another on her nightstand, along with her watch, which was also found on the nightstand at the time of her murder. These details were important to the detectives because they indicated that Shanti might have been getting ready for bed when she was attacked. Additionally, her cell phone was on the nightstand, but there had been no activity on it after 11:30 p.m. on April 23, 2018. The medical examiner's report showed that Shanti had no defensive wounds, suggesting she was caught off guard by the attack. Detectives theorized that Shanti was sitting on the edge of her bed, taking off her jewelry when David attacked her from behind, leading to her death. They believed David then moved her body into the bathtub. Another important discovery was that nothing seemed to have been stolen from the house, leading the detectives to rule out robbery as a motive. However, Shanti's $155,000 engagement ring was missing. As the investigation progressed, detectives found that David's description of his happy marriage with Shanti clashed with what others believed about their relationship. David often hid Jackson's toys and only returned them when Jackson asked for them. The detectives suspected that David was using these tactics to manipulate both Shanti and her son. While searching the garage where David was sleeping, they found an unplugged refrigerator filled with children's toys. This finding reinforced the detectives' belief that David was engaged in manipulative behavior by intermittently hiding Jackson's toys. David appeared to be trying to control the emotions of Shanti and her son. After detectives executed a search warrant at Shanti and David's home, they seized the couple's computers. On Shanti's computer, they discovered notes revealing her dissatisfaction with her marriage to David. In these notes, Shanti described David as cheap, controlling, and narcissistic. She wrote that he never paid when they went out to eat, and on the rare occasions he did, he would make excuses, claiming he forgot his wallet. Shanti shared feelings of sadness and loneliness, expressing her fear. She desired to no longer be part of their life together. She indicated that her mental unhappiness was largely due to her difficult interactions with David. Additionally, the notes showed that living in a house under construction added significant stress to her life. As the detectives investigated Shanti's murder, they uncovered significant information linking David to her death. It was found that Shanti had been hospitalized for 3 days prior to her body being discovered. The detectives learned that she had expressed worries about her eating habits, telling her nanny that she could no longer tolerate spicy foods or drink alcohol. Furthermore, Shanti was experiencing rapid weight loss, which raised more suspicion among the investigators. They were confused by the toxicology tests conducted during her autopsy, which did not reveal any toxic substances in her body. Despite the lack of evidence, they began to suspect that David might have been poisoning Shanti, but they were uncertain about the specific substance responsible, as nothing was detected in the tests. David had been married before he wed Shanti, which prompted detectives to investigate his previous marriage. They found out that his first wife, Carol, suffered from health problems similar to Shanti's. David met Carol on a blind date in 1997, and they married 2 years later. The detectives were concerned about a possible link between Carol's health issues and Shanti's rapid decline in health. Shortly after their marriage, Carol began facing various health challenges, including persistent nausea, fainting spells, severe reactions to spicy foods and alcohol. Some of her close friends suggested to the detectives that David might have started poisoning her after they got married. To learn more about David's past, the detectives traveled from Florida to Minnesota in November 2018 to interview Carol in person. During the recorded interview, Carol described her struggles with chronic pain and immune system problems that remained undiagnosed. She stressed the need to understand her background to grasp the context of her health issues and mentioned that David was the one who cooked their meals during their marriage. The detectives asked Carol about the possibility that David was involved in her health issues, noting it was suspicious that both of his ex-wives faced similar health problems. Carol firmly denied any suggestion that her ex-husband had poisoned her, stating that her health issues continued even after they separated. During the investigation into Shanti's murder, detectives received a call from an employee at Club Orlando, a private men's spa. The club provided amenities like hot tubs, pools, a gym, and dark rooms for intimate activities. To become a member, individuals needed to buy a pass or membership. The employee informed the detectives that David had multiple memberships at Club Orlando and renewed them every 6 months without exception. He claimed to have seen David engaged in intimate activities with other men. Conversations with Shanti's friends revealed that she would never accept her husband having same intimate relationships. This raised the question of whether Shanti had discovered David's actions and threatened to leave him. As the investigation progressed, the detectives thoroughly reviewed all evidence, including information from an employee at Club Orlando. They sought to find out if David's spa membership and the reported intimate activity could shed light on Shanti's death. When the forensic results arrived from the state crime lab, they revealed Shanti's DNA under David's fingernails and his fingerprints were the only ones found in the bathtub. This evidence contradicted David's story, in which he stated that Shanti had accidentally fallen while entering the tub. The detectives had anticipated finding Shanti's fingerprints in the tub as well, but they were absent. On August 29, 2018, David was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and he was denied bail. His friends were shocked by the news, as they found it hard to believe he could be responsible for Shanti's murder. They suspected that the police were looking for an easy resolution and not thoroughly investigating to find the true culprit. However, the detectives carried out a detailed investigation, following all leads regarding Shanti's murder before making the arrest. Additionally, the detectives considered Shanti's ex-husband, Jim Cooper, as a potential suspect due to their rocky divorce, which raised concerns about whether Jim might have harmed Shanti. After interviewing Jim, the detectives were able to eliminate him as a suspect based on his alibi. After David was arrested, police searched his mother's home in Orlando, where he had been living. In a suitcase, they found Shanti's missing engagement ring, which had gone missing the night she was murdered. This discovery strengthened their case against David. On April 18, 2019, almost a year after Shanti's murder, prosecutor Ryan Vecchio was meeting with Orlando Police Inspector Teresa Sprague when David's attorney called. At the time, David was represented by Robert Mandel, who called after receiving Sprague's investigative report. After some deliberation, Robert Mandel informed him that he had hired private investigator Billy Lane from Prison Break Investigations to investigate the case and that he had some papers in his home. ASA Vecchio asked him where these papers came from, and Robert informed him that they were taken from the loft apartment David was staying in at the time of the murder and that the police had missed them. He informed him that these papers had been packaged as evidence and kept by Billy Lane at his office in Lakeland and that they planned to test the blood and DNA at some point. They had now kept these papers for 11 months without revealing them. Inside the brown evidence bag, which was marked and labeled, were bed sheets, a fitted sheet, a pillowcase, and a pair of black socks. Police also found a green cord collected from the Trans home that had been found wrapped around a wooden beam from a ladder. Although the strangulation marks were not easily visible, Shanti had an unusual linear cut on the right side of her neck with possible strangulation marks on both sides. Using gloves and magnifying glasses, investigators examined the entire cord for evidence of blood but found nothing that could be seen with the naked eye or under a magnifying glass. In July 2019, a jailhouse informant came forward with important details about a confession from David. The informant said that Shanti had found text messages on David's phone that exposed his intimate relationships with multiple men. This led to a heated argument where Shanti expressed her anger, threatened to expose him, and demanded a divorce. The informant claimed that David admitted to blacking out before he hit Shanti, which ultimately caused her death. Additionally, the informant stated he had known David before being incarcerated and had seen him at Club Orlando. He also revealed that David mentioned cambo, a toxic secretion from an Amazonian giant monkey frog used in controversial treatments. David had allegedly told the informant that this substance could be a poison that kills without leaving traces in a toxicology report. David's trial was postponed due to the global issue, which affected many legal proceedings across the country. As a result, there were significant delays in his case, lasting almost 2 years. Finally, in 2022, the trial began. However, it took an unexpected turn when both the defense and prosecution's medical experts evaluated David, determined that he was not competent to stand trial, concluding that he was experiencing severe symptoms of schizophrenia. In October 2023, after a 6-day trial, a jury found David Trans guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Shanti's son, Jackson, now lives with her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. Shanti, a devoted mother and woman searching for love, stability after a difficult divorce, fell victim to David Trans's manipulative and violent betrayal. Her death at their Delaney Park home, amid a stalled renovation that symbolized the breakdown of their marriage, underscored the dangers of broken promises and hidden motives. David's sentencing in October 2023 brought justice, but it did not erase the pain endured by Shanti's son, Jackson, and her loved ones. Being gullible can be dangerous, sometimes even life-threatening. We all have moments when we wish to believe in miracles, feel that dreams might still be within reach. When something you've wished for seems almost attainable, it's easy to let caution and common sense slip away. Criminals often take advantage of this vulnerability. The case of Elodie Morel, a young French woman, in 2005 shocked the nation due to its brutality and inhumanity. What made it even more disturbing was the indifference shown by ordinary people who were aware of her situation but chose to remain silent for their own gain. This story reminds us that not all dreams come true and highlights the importance of being cautious about whom you trust, especially when they promise a fairy tale ending. Elodie Morel was born on 1976, in Marseille. From a young age, she had a strikingly beautiful appearance. As she grew older, Elodie developed into an even more stunning woman, with many people believing she should be on television or magazine covers. As a teenager, she dreamed of being a model, but coming from a modest background, few took her aspirations seriously. In the 1990s, Elodie submitted her photos to various modeling agencies several times but never received any replies. After finishing high school, she attended college, married a classmate named Sylvain at 22, and had a son by 25. It appeared she had abandoned her modeling dreams permanently. By 2005, Elodie worked as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in downtown Marseille. She often received compliments and noticed people admiring or envying her looks. At 29, she maintained a perfect figure and beautiful features, easily appearing to be in her early 20s. Though Elodie never completely gave up on her modeling aspirations, she stopped discussing them, believing her time had passed. In April 2005, Elodie filled out an online application, submitted her best photos, and expressed her desire to pursue a modeling career. She soon received a reply, but what seemed like a promising opportunity from a fashion photographer turned out to be a dangerous trap. About 2 weeks after posting her profile, Elodie received an enticing offer to become the new face of the prestigious English luxury car company, Rolls-Royce. The contract promised €1,000 per day for a photo shoot, but to secure the deal, she needed to meet the photographer for a test shoot. The meeting was scheduled for May 2nd at a bar in Aigues-Mortes. Excited, Elodie shared the news with her husband, who was doubtful but didn't voice his concerns. That morning, she left her son with her parents, got into her car, and drove to the meeting location. She planned to stay in Aigues-Mortes for 3 days and had already booked a hotel room. Later that evening, Elodie called her husband to update him on her progress and mentioned she was feeling nervous. Sylvain wished her luck, told her to call him as soon as she could. This would be the last conversation he had with his wife. When Elodie arrived at the bar as planned, she sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she believed she had been emailing. However, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s approached her. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explained that he was there to meet her and scout locations for the photo shoot scheduled for the next day. Since Elodie had little experience in the modeling industry, she didn't find anything suspicious about him, took him at his word. The man appeared professional, spoke confidently, and seemed knowledgeable about her prior conversations with the photographer. Their conversation flowed easily and revolved around Elodie's potential career. She began to imagine herself on the covers of popular magazines, daydreamed about how she would spend the money she would earn. Around 9 p.m., as night fell, the man proposed they look for the ideal spot for the next day's photo shoot. Aigues-Mortes, a beautiful medieval town, is filled with scenic towers, fortresses, and chapels, perfect locations for taking stunning pictures. Excited and unaware of any danger, Elodie left the bar with her new acquaintance and got into his car. Tragically, she was never seen alive again. What is particularly unsettling is that a man who knew the suspect and was aware of his malicious intentions witnessed the entire encounter. He tried to step in, but his efforts were futile. That same night, on May 2nd, a call came into the Aigues-Mortes police station. A panicked man reported that a young woman was in serious danger and that immediate action was needed. He did not know the victim's name or her location, but he was convinced time was running out. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tarasco, a nightclub owner who frequently provided the police with confidential information. He stated that earlier that night, he had seen his acquaintance, Guillaume Mingaud, at the bar. Guillaume had connections to the criminal underworld and was notorious for his violent behavior. The day before, he had boasted about meeting a naive, attractive girl online whom he intended to abduct and sell to a brothel in Spain for a substantial profit. Starting the search for Elodie Morel was challenging because the police had no solid leads, names, or locations. They knew that finding her quickly was crucial. By the next morning, they learned her name when her worried family reached out, reporting that she had been missing since the previous evening and that her phone was turned off. They explained that she had left for a photo shoot in another town and then disappeared. Initially, the police did not link her disappearance to the family's report. They thought she might have run away with a romantic partner. However, her family stressed that she would never leave her young son or vanish without a message. The search for Elodie did not officially start until 3 days after she went missing, which wasted valuable time. Tragically, during those 2 days, Elodie was still alive, being held captive in a house in Vergès where she suffered torture and abuse as her captors decided what to do with her. On May 5, 2005, the lead investigator in Aigues-Mortes' missing person case began to suspect that she was the endangered woman mentioned by an informant. Dominique Tarasco was called to the police station to provide a formal statement. When shown a photo of Elodie, he immediately confirmed that she was the woman he had seen 3 days earlier in a bar with Guillaume. When asked where he thought Guillaume might have taken Elodie, Dominique recalled hearing about an empty nightclub on the north side of town that had recently closed down. A police team conducted a surveillance operation at that location, and by that evening, they arrested 48-year-old Guillaume and 53-year-old Richard as they arrived at the nightclub. The exact role of Richard in this case remained unclear and needed further investigation. During a search of Guillaume, police discovered Elodie Morel's credit card in one of Guillaume's pockets, which confirmed his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were taken to the station for questioning, but Richard was released a few hours later due to insufficient evidence against him. Richard lived with his family on the outskirts of town and had a friendly relationship with Guillaume, but he had no prior legal issues. Guillaume initially claimed he didn't know Elodie and that he had just stolen her credit card. In his first account, he said that on May 2nd, while at a bar, he spotted an attractive, well-dressed woman and assumed she had money. He decided to rob her. Guillaume approached Elodie's table, gave her a compliment, and offered to buy her a coffee. Although she stated she was waiting for someone, she didn't tell him to leave. They engaged in a brief conversation, during which he managed to take her credit card from her purse that was hanging on her chair, leaving before she realized it was gone. Guillaume insisted that the entire incident was spontaneous. He claimed he only stole her card and had no involvement in her disappearance. Investigators found that he used the stolen card the same day to withdraw cash from an ATM located on the outskirts of town. However, he could not explain how he knew the PIN, which made his story seem unreliable. Additionally, a background check revealed that Guillaume had a criminal history with multiple convictions, including armed robbery, banned substance trafficking, and a 9-year prison sentence for a violent abuse. Despite being released from prison, Guillaume had not changed his behavior. Instead, he had become more cautious to avoid returning to jail. The situation worsened for Guillaume when police discovered Elodie's phone number in his phone, along with their email exchanges regarding a photo shoot. This evidence contradicted his initial account and forced him to change his story. He admitted that he found Elodie's modeling profile online and began messaging her while pretending to be a photographer. Elodie, being trusting and eager, quickly agreed to meet him without much skepticism. Guillaume had been using a female alias to communicate with her, which made him nervous that she might become suspicious when a man showed up instead of the expected photographer. Nevertheless, Elodie saw nothing unusual and willingly went with him late at night to check out possible locations for the photo shoot, even getting into his car without hesitation, a fact later confirmed by witnesses. After driving to a remote location, Guillaume left the main road and stopped the car. He pulled out a gun and demanded that Elodie give him her credit card. When she refused, he took her purse and found the card himself. He then insisted on getting the PIN, but Elodie still wouldn't provide it. Angered, he slammed her head against the dashboard, choked her until she finally gave in and revealed the code. After that, he locked Elodie in the trunk and went to the nearest ATM to check if she was telling the truth. The PIN worked, and he emptied her account. With the money in his possession, he started thinking about what to do next with the woman locked in his trunk. Feeling the need for time to figure things out, Guillaume drove to his friend Richard's house to hide Elodie for a while. He told Richard about the woman in his trunk, mentioned that he planned to sell her for a significant profit, which he was willing to share with Richard. It's worth noting that Richard and his wife once worked at the same nightclub. He is a security guard and she is a cleaner. After the nightclub closed, they both lost their jobs and were struggling to get by, leading Richard to begin drinking heavily. Richard agreed to help Guillaume by giving him the keys to his empty garage, suggesting it as a place to keep the woman. He wanted to avoid any direct interaction with her and preferred to let Guillaume handle things, hoping to receive a share of the money. Later investigations found that Elodie had been held captive for more than 2 days, during which she suffered severe torture, assault, beatings, and severe hunger and thirst. Guillaume reported that he and Elodie spent a lot of time talking about their children, who were of similar ages. Elodie pleaded for her release, arguing that her son needed her. Guillaume admitted that he felt some sympathy for her and briefly considered letting her go. He even brought her a bottle of water because the garage was extremely hot and she had been there for 2 days. However, on the night of May 4th, everything changed when Richard, heavily intoxicated, decided to confront Elodie. Guillaume claimed that while he was away, Richard entered the garage and strangled Elodie with a rope. Guillaume maintained that he did not take part in the actual murder and only helped to hide her body. However, he would not disclose the location of her remains. During the police search of the Lignier residence, they seemed nervous but not particularly shocked. They allowed the officers to enter without resistance and continued eating at the kitchen table, showing little concern for the search. The police discovered several items belonging to Elodie in their teenage daughter's room, such as her cell phone, jewelry, a hair clip, and a wristwatch. Additionally, Elodie's purse and wallet were found with Richard's wife. Other items, including torn pieces of the victim's clothing, were found in the trash bin outside the house. More alarming evidence was revealed in Richard's garage. Investigators found dried brown stains that looked like blood, along with crumpled tissues, cigarette butts, an empty plastic bottle, and a piece of rope. Both Richard and his wife, Francine, were arrested, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When asked how Elodie's belongings came to be in their home, they explained that Guillaume had brought them in exchange for using their garage. They acknowledged knowing that he was holding a woman there but chose not to intervene because he had promised to reward them. They also admitted to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope when he asked, without questioning his motives. Forensic evidence showed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. Additionally, DNA found on crumpled tissues matched Guillaume's. Saliva found on cigarette butts belonged to both Elodie and Guillaume. Elodie's family asserted that she had never smoked due to her asthma, which caused her to have severe coughing and choking fits when exposed to cigarette smoke. The chilling reality emerged. Guillaume had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, repeatedly assaulting and likely torturing her, forcing her to smoke as part of his abuse. Guillaume changed his story after the investigators revealed the forensic evidence. He admitted that he and Elodie had been intimate in the garage, but insisted it was consensual. He claimed they had smoked together and talked a lot before he decided to let her go. However, he still maintained that Richard Lignier had killed her while he was away, supposedly because Richard feared Elodie might go to the police after he released her. This explanation raised many inconsistencies, the most significant being that Richard had no motive to kill Elodie. First, he had never met her, and she had never seen him or any of his family members. Second, Elodie had been brought to the garage in the trunk of a car, meaning she wouldn't have known where she was and couldn't lead the police there. Lastly, Richard was just an ordinary drunk, unable to physically harm anyone. He was satisfied with receiving payment in the form of Elodie's belongings and a promise of money from his friend once the situation was resolved. Earlier, investigators discovered an empty plastic water bottle in the garage. Guillaume claimed he felt sorry for Elodie and brought her water, but tests revealed that the liquid contained high levels of potent drugs. After consuming these drugs, Elodie would have likely been unconscious or barely aware, giving Guillaume the opportunity to do as he pleased. When questioned about why he drugged her, Guillaume changed his story again. He now said he was prepared to set her free and that they had agreed she wouldn't go to the police. He claimed Elodie wanted to return home to her family and forget the incident, as if it were just a bad dream. However, he asserted that she attempted to escape, which resulted in a struggle during which he hit her, explaining the blood stains found on the garage floor. He then locked her inside and left. Guillaume stated he drugged Elodie to calm her and prevent her from trying to escape again. He crushed some pills, dissolved them in water, and then departed, returning 12 hours later. By that time, Elodie was severely dehydrated. She quickly drank the water without noticing its odd taste and passed out within minutes. Guillaume claimed she accidentally overdosed because her weakened body couldn't handle the drugs. Realizing she had stopped breathing, he put her body in the trunk of her car, which he had left in a parking lot near the bar where they first met. Later, he drove the car to Richard's property using the keys he had taken from her. Although Guillaume refused to disclose where he took the car with Elodie's body, his account had numerous inconsistencies. Notably, a rope found in the garage contained sweat and skin cells from both Elodie and Guillaume, suggesting he likely strangled her. All the evidence was stacked against him, and he was aware of it. To reduce his sentence, Guillaume struck a deal with investigators, confessing that he had left the car near the old cemetery in Aigues-Mortes. The police found the vehicle on May 6, exactly where he indicated. It had been exposed to the sun for 3 days, and the body in the trunk was already decomposing. The autopsy revealed clear signs of torture, beatings, and strangulation. The victim had been tied up, drugged, assaulted, and ultimately strangled to death with a rope. The trial for the 3 individuals involved in the crime began in February 2008, nearly 3 years after the shocking events. Guillaume Mingaud was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Richard Lignier and his wife attempted to persuade the jury that they had no knowledge of the captive in their garage. They claimed they had merely let an old friend stay with them for a few days without asking questions. However, the discovery of the victims' belongings in their home contradicted their story. Ligniers was charged with aiding and abetting. In 2010, each received a 6-year prison sentence. Guillaume and his lawyer appealed the court's decision, attempting to place some of the blame for the crime on the Lignier. This was their only chance to lessen his life sentence and reduce the minimum time he would have to serve. On May 3, 2010, exactly 5 years after Elodie Morel's murder, the new trial began. During the proceedings, it was revealed that Richard and Francine were aware of Elodie's captivity and the serious danger she faced, yet they took no action. Not only did they keep her belongings and give some to their daughter, but they also supplied Guillaume with everything he requested, such as rope and water, without questioning his motives or considering the consequences. Ultimately, the court reduced Guillaume Mingaud's life sentence to 30 years, requiring him to serve 2/3 of that time before he could be eligible for parole. Richard and Francine Lignier, due to their complicity and inaction, were each sentenced to 8 years in prison with no chance for early release. The tragic case of Elodie Morel serves as a harrowing reminder of the perils of unchecked trust and the devastating consequences of bystander indifference. Her dream of a modeling career, pursued with Rosa with hope, was cruelly exploited by Guillaume Mingaud, whose deceit led to her brutal torture and murder. Equally disturbing is the complicity of Richard and Francine Lignier, who prioritized personal gain over human life, allowing Elodie's suffering to continue in their garage. This case underscores the critical need for vigilance in the face of enticing promises and the moral imperative to act against injustice. Elodie's story, etched into France's collective memory, calls us to honor her by fostering skepticism, compassion, and courage to prevent such tragedies from recurring.